What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto became the coldest missing nin in history? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Uzumaki Naruto collapsed on his back, totally exhausted from the day's practice with his sensei, the toad Sannin Jiraiya. He'd finally mastered a new explosive jutsu, though the exercises of the day had drained him of almost all his chakra. Now that he'd learned it, they could begin working on something new tomorrow. But for now he was content to just lay here in a weary stupor. Idly he watched his breath make faint vapor clouds in the chilly, spring air. "Hey, Naruto, start the fire would ya?" Jiraiya yelled from his spot on his bedroll. Yeah, old pervert," Naruto grumbled and dragged himself to his feet to fetch some firewood. A pine cone bounced off the back of his head. "Ow, what the hell was that for?" he snarled. "I heard that, you ungrateful brat," Jiraiya yelled. "It's the truth, Aro Sennin," the blonde boy yelled back, sticking his tongue out. "Stop calling me that," the perverted hermit in question roared. It was a good thing they weren't in any city, otherwise they might have been arrested for public misconduct. At least until Jiraiya summoned a giant toad on top of any officers dumb enough to chase him. As it was, their bickering echoed loudly in the cool night air of the ancient pine forest they'd made camp in, with their noise only reaching the ears of the occasional startled deer. Their camping in the middle of nowhere had to do with the long-term trip they were on. For the past year and a half, Jiraiya had been training Naruto non-stop in preparation for his eventual fight with Akatsuki. Akatsuki was an organization that's composed of 9 S-class missing nins, and it held some of the most dangerous people on the planet within its ranks. For an unknown reason, they had become interested in Naruto some time back and had already tried once to abduct him. Well, not exactly Naruto. They were actually after the thing trapped inside of him. Over 14 years ago, on the day of Naruto's birth, an enormous 9-tailed fox demon attacked the hidden village of the Leaf. The monster outclassed the entire shinobi armed forces and was far too powerful to defeat. Their leader at the time, the Yondaime Hokage, sacrificed his life using an extremely powerful jutsu to seal the demon into a newborn child. Naruto was the lucky winner who received the creature, and he spent the next 12 years of his life as an outcast in his own village, hated and seen as the demon itself rather than its living prison. Even crueler, he had no idea why the villagers all hated him until the day he stole a forbidden scroll from the Hokage and a traitor ninja told him the true story. He wasn't destined to be alone forever, though, and soon after he became a genin he found people he could call friends. Over a year and a half ago one of his closest friends, Uchiha Sasuke, betrayed their hidden village in a blind pursuit of power. He and Naruto nearly killed each other during his escape, with Sasuke barely emerging the victor. He defected to Konoha's strongest enemy, the Sound Nation, to be trained by the Snake Sannin, Orochimaru. Ever since, Naruto had dedicated himself to becoming stronger not only to defend himself against the Akatsuki, but to able to protect the people important to him from any threat. He didn't want a repeat of what befell Sasuke to happen to any of his other friends. After all, Orochimaru certainly wouldn't be satisfied with only Sasuke when he had the whole Leaf to conquer. And so here he was, on a training trip in the middle of nowhere, with only a perverted hermit with debatable sanity as his company. Despite being exhausted, Naruto managed to gather up enough firewood to last the night. Grumbling about lazy perverts, he set up the fire pit and summoned what was left of his chakra to ignite the pile of wood he laid into it. In minutes he was relaxing on his back near a cheery campfire, looking at the moon through the massive and shadowy pine trees all around them. The trees seemed like giant sentinels, lording over everything in their domain. His mind began to wander, as it tended to when he was relaxed, and he thought on his friends back home. He was really curious if they'd changed much in the year or so he'd been away. Naruto had grown, not only in power and skill, but physically as well. He was still short, but at least he was taller than the girls of his class now. His face was leaner and his ribs didn't stick out anymore, though that was less from training and more from Jiraiya insisting he eat something other than ramen as his diet. To his pleasure, his arms were also longer. Having a greater reach would definitely be an advantage in any fight. All in all, he had the beginnings of a large, lean frame that would be perfect for his wild combat methods. He still had a ways to go though, and it seemed like it would be years before he was a respectable size. He hoped his body grew in sooner rather than later. After all, who'd respect a short Hokage? Sandaime was short, but he'd heard the man was tall when he started as Hokage, so he didn't really think the old guy counted. "Hey, are you writing another of those dumb perverted books again?" Naruto asked when he glanced over and saw his sensei sitting cross-legged amongst a pile of scrolls. Jiraiya glanced up at his student and glared at him. "For your information, no. I'm designing another scenario for you to think about," the white-haired man said. Naruto mentally braced himself for the upcoming challenge. A few weeks after they left Konoha, Jiraiya and Naruto had gotten into one hell of an argument over his training. Naruto was whining about never becoming Hokage when the Toad Hermit finally told him to shut up and listen. He gave him a situation where Naruto was Hokage and he had a choice between allowing a couple dozen people he'd never met to die or sending one of his friends in to save them, even if it meant his friend's death. Naruto had gotten blustery and demanded to know what the hell that had to do with anything. Jiraiya had coldly replied, "That's what a Hokage is. A Hokage isn't a prize to be waved around," he'd continued, "but a title of trust. The leader of the village has the lives of everyone in his or her hand." Did he really think he deserved such trust? The hermit had asked Naruto. The blonde genin had shut up for days after that. The swing in personality was so extreme that Jiraiya was beginning to worry he'd gone too far and crushed the boy's dream, even if he had spoken the truth. The hermit was even about to apologize when Naruto had demanded more information on the hypothetical situation. Surprised, Jiraiya had made up a bunch of stuff of the top of his head and watched his student screw his whisker-marked face up in thought. Then he grinned and said that he'd save the people in danger himself. Jiraiya had bonked him on the head and they'd continued on their trip, but from then on the Sannin made sure to include mental exercises as well physical in his training. It wasn't that hard for someone as creative as him to come up with new scenarios to play out, but it did mean he had less time to write his dirty books at night. Oh well, sacrifices must be made if they didn't want Naruto to become a dumb Hokage 10 or 15 years down the line. He just hoped the blonde twerp understood how much he was giving up for him. During their training, Jiraiya had analyzed Naruto's strengths and weaknesses. At times, he found Naruto capable of extreme cunning to the point of near genius. The downside was these incidents were only in combat and the boy had almost no strategic thought beyond a minute into the future. He was creative though, and the Toad Hermit encouraged him to actively use that talent with the mental exercises he made up. Naruto would probably never be able to outthink somebody in the long term, but with Jiraiya's help he wouldn't need to. If they could get his cunning and tactical thinking up high enough, then he'd at least be able to understand when someone else came up with a better strategic plan and use that to his advantage. If that Nara genius kept exercising his own mind, they'd be a perfect complement to each as Hokage and advisor. Well, assuming he ever got Naruto past Genin. Though to be fair, the boy advanced fast. It actually kept surprising him how fast Naruto was growing. If the boy was absolutely unable to do something, like strategic thinking, then that part of him changed rather slowly. But if it was something he excelled at, like chakra capacity, then he advanced in leaps and bounds. It was actually kind of weird. The boy advanced in different areas at different rates, but they didn't seem to be slowing down. If he could make his chakra capacity double in a month, then it would be tripled in 2 months, quadrupled in 4 and so on. He could pick up certain jutsu in days, when even a genius would take longer, and Naruto was a far cry from a genius. The kid just didn't seem to have a limit to what he could learn or how far he could grow. Jiraiya wasn't sure if his mind was playing tricks on him, but in his lifetime he'd only seen that from one other person before. Unfortunately, he still couldn't be certain about the boy's lineage or whether he'd inherited that bloodline. It would be interesting if it was true, but he'd need to train the boy into at least adulthood to be absolutely sure. "So what's the game this time, Ero Sennin?" Naruto curiously asked. Alright, I think I've got it," Jiraiya muttered while scratching his chin. He took a blank scroll and spread a good 7 feet of it on the ground. Grabbing his brush, the hermit carefully covered the entire surface in seal script. It took several minutes to write it all down, even for a grand master of seals like himself. The hermit looked his work over and nodded before putting the brush away. "Come over here, I got your exercise set up," Jiraiya said. Naruto staggered to his feet and wobbled around the fire to his sensei. The blonde collapsed in front of his sensei, gearing his weary mind up for the challenge. The toad hermit moved the scroll between them and pressed his hands on it. The script began to glow before floating up from the paper. The chakra formed into a three-dimensional environment, the same horizontal dimensions of the scroll it flowed from. As Naruto watched, the image formed into a bird's eye view of a hilly countryside. The area was the obvious site of a battle, judging from the craters, bodies, and general debris lying all around. Tiny figures the size of insects began to form into varying types and rank of shinobi. Jiraiya grunted, satisfied with his work, and looked up to his student. "Alright, here's the game plan. Your main force is made up of 3 squads of Junin, 4 squads of Chunin, and a couple Genin here and there. You also have 2 medic nins, 3 Anbu, and a special Junin with a powerful bloodline limit that can alter the density and flow of air. There's also the Hokage, you. You're cut off from supplies and reinforcements. None of the runners you've sent have returned. You don't know the power of the enemy's forces, but you know you're outnumbered 2 to 1 at least. You've got a bad feeling they're gonna attack soon. What do you do?" The perverted hermit said. "What's the mission?" Naruto asked automatically, while staring at the map. He forgot most of his exhaustion when Jiraiya started talking. He'd never admitted to the Arrow Sennin, but he actually enjoyed these little puzzles, even if they did give him headaches half the time. "No mission. Well, not an official one, anyways. You need to get out of there alive. Preferably with most of your forces intact and as many of the enemy dead or disabled as possible. You want to limit pursuit or their assassin teams will pick your people apart before you can escape more than a mile or 2, Jiraiya elaborated. Naruto frowned and puzzled over it. He leaned to and fro, taking in every possible angle of the simulation. Damn, the old pervert knew he sucked at strategy. He was much better at thinking on the fly than this planning crap. Then it hit him. He had the perfect idea, and it wasn't the special Junin's bloodline. Jiraiya obviously threw that in there to make him focus on the limit and not the real answer for the simulation. Neither student nor sensei noticed a straw hat falling from a tree 50 feet away. 2 dark figures moved as flashing blur through the night air. They bounced from tree to tree, barely slowing for an instant. They made almost no sound as they moved. Their dark cloaks and straw hats with hangings obscured most of their features, except for their cold and focused eyes. The seals the higher-ups had provided worked like a charm, even if it did take a while for them to find the target without a sample of its blood. No matter. They had found the Kyuubi vessel and were moving to intercept. It was quite fortunate that it had decided to leave on a training trip with one of the Sannin out into the middle of nowhere. It was risky to attempt an abduction in the middle of the leaf, but in the backwoods of Fire Country with no one around for miles? It was the best opportunity any of them would have for a long time. There was the issue of the old pervert, but the organization was confident they knew his limits and that the 2 agents they'd sent could handle him. There, up ahead, the glow of their cheery little campfire gave them away for miles. How trusting of them. The larger of the 2 missing nins halted just before the campsite. His partner stopped amid the branches to his left. They watched the 2 shinobi as they used some sort of illusion jutsu to simulate a battle. The man grinned slightly. So the Kyuubi brat was getting strategy training from the Sannin, huh? The profile on the brat must have been serious when it said he was dedicated to being the next Hokage. It didn't matter now. They'd grab the little shit and the Kyuubi would be back at headquarters by this time tomorrow. The man decided to make his move and dove through the trees. Behind him, his partner allowed her hat to drop, revealing a mechanical eye and an unpleasant smirk. She too followed, mere seconds after her partner. "Ha, I got this one Arrow Sennin. All I gotta do I kill your advisors and use the rest of your guys as bait while you escape." To their credit, despite being caught off guard, neither Naruto nor Jiraiya were in the same spot before the man's first syllable ended. By the time the stranger started his second word, both student and sensei were already in fighting stances and ready to defend themselves. Both the man and his partner were more than a little surprised at the speed they moved. Expecting them to be stunned, it was disconcerting to see both the target and his guardian ready to fight at a second or two's notice. No one said a word for several tense moments. The larger stranger again spoke, to break the silence. "What, not gonna demand to know who we are or why we're here?" he asked. "I know who each of you are and exactly why you're here. I'd been led to believe Akatsuki wasn't coming after Naruto for another year. Seems I was misinformed. Jiraiya's voice was cold enough to make hardened hunter nins hesitate. Odd. The man prided himself on his information-gathering skills, and it wasn't in the profile for him to shrug off a failure in his information network. Yep, that would be as spreading some misinformation. You need better spies, Jiraiya-san, the Akatsuki man said. The Sannin across from him said nothing, nor did his face even flicker in response. The stranger was surprised to find it hard to keep eye contact with the white-haired man. Yeah, we got lucky you're training so far away from anyone. Yeah, the woman, man? It was hard to tell, spoke for the first time. Again, neither Leaf Nin said anything. Even the abnormally loud blonde remained silent. That definitely didn't fit any profile. The Kyuubi vessel was just staring at him with icy blue eyes that came close to his sensei's glare. Well, I guess introductions are in order, the man said as he pulled his hat off, revealing a bald head that looked like it was carved out of granite. He bore a scratched hidden cloud forehead protector, and there seemed to be some sort of huge sword strapped to his back. He continued, "My name is Kotetsu Tsurugi and my partner is..." "Who gives a shit?" Naruto growled and tossed a handful of shuriken at the missing nin to shut him up. To the criminal's surprise, the steel projectiles moved far faster than a mere genin should be capable of. Even one taught by a Sannin shouldn't be capable of this, he thought as he dodged to the side quickly. There was a split in his cloak where a shuriken had nicked it, even though he evaded the attack at considerable speed. "I don't give a fuck who you are. Shut up and fight or leave," the blonde demon vessel growled in a surprisingly canine way. It was unusually intimidating, even coming from a 14-year-old. This was not going the way they'd expected. Both Target and Guardian were far more prepared than they'd anticipated. No matter, they'd simply adapt. It still annoyed Tsurugi though, that the plan was already experiencing mishaps. "Fine, I hope your sensei's been preparing you, brat," the Akatsuki growled. He rushed at the blonde the same moment Naruto charged him. The two exchanged a quick flurry of blows before Tsurugi leapt back a few paces. The kid was good, but it wasn't enough by far. He began making hand seals and wondered for an instant why the kid wasn't doing the same. "So it looks like I get to kill you, yeah?" Jiraiya's lip curled in disgust at the arrogant smirk on the woman-man-thing's face. She wasn't making any real moves towards him, so he was paranoid of some sort of trick. That trick appeared right next to his face an instant later in the form of some sort of clay bird. The explosion knocked Naruto off balance and he rolled with it rather than fighting to stay upright. Glancing up, he saw a hail of metal passing right where he had been moments ago. Looks like his name really is a pun. Steel, huh? Another seal and more metal flew towards him. Naruto really couldn't make out what the objects were, but his neck crawled with a danger sense, so it was probably a good idea to get the hell out of the way. Gathering what little remained of his chakra, he did a super jump backwards over 20 feet and landed at the base of a large pine tree. His opponent grinned and whistled at the blonde's little stunt. Naruto wasn't so pleased and had to fight to keep himself from panting hard. That had been it. He was totally out of stamina, except for the little he needed to stay alive. He couldn't even make a single clone with his favorite jutsu, Kage Bunshin. His best skill, the wind technique Rasengan, was totally out of the question. He'd have to somehow beat this guy using only taijutsu, which wasn't his strongest area. "Here it comes, brat," the man yelled and drew his sword. It was as long as that shark freak's Samahata, but the metal was smooth and dark gray. Naruto didn't know this, but it looked just like a claymore-grade sword from another era. Albeit, a claymore that was a foot wide. The man pointed it at the blonde, who narrowed his eyes trying to anticipate what the guy was gonna pull next. Was he so fast that he could cover 30 feet with that thing? The man made a few one-handed seals and Naruto got his answer. "That got you, yeah. No way you could have lived, yeah," the androgynous Akatsuki said. The missing nin's smirk took on a look of confusion when the dust settled. Instead of a dead body or parts of a body, there was a bizarre, white pincushion where the Sannin had been standing. As she watched, the spines relaxed and turned into hair, before the whole mess retracted into Jiraiya's normal hairstyle. The man hadn't changed expression through the whole scene, giving the Akatsuki agent the same icy glare as before. "You're pretty stupid," was all he said as he rushed him, her. Clay birds and spiders flew every which way, blasting apart the ground and trees surrounding them. It didn't escape the missing-nin's notice that none of them came close enough to do more than singe the hermit's outlandish robes. As he rushed her, Jiraiya was already gathering whirling chakra into his hand, forming a glowing blue-white sphere that vibrated with barely restrained power. He thrust his palm out at the man-woman who quickly tried to ducked out of the way as an enormous sheet of metal erupted from the man's sword and shot across the camp. It passed over Naruto's head, coming close enough to nick a tuft of blonde hair off his scalp and kept going into the tree behind him. Or was that trees? The genin spared a quick glance behind his shoulder to see that not only had the tree right behind him been sliced through and was falling over, but at least 5, maybe 10 more were all cut through and falling in various directions. He looked back and rolled to the side as another wing of metal impacted the ground where he had been crouched. Damn, he's acting pretty gung-ho for someone who wants to capture me. Why the hell is he trying to kill me? Naruto thought. The man performed his attack again. Naruto dodged, but at the last moment was screwed up by the ground shaking to near earthquake levels as all the falling trees finally hit earth one after the other. It didn't screw him up too bad, but even that relatively minor error was more than enough for the attack to land a serious slash along his side. The flesh and muscle ripped deep. A loud, wet splashing made him think for one horrible instant that he'd actually been eviscerated, but it was just blood gushing out. Sickened from pain, he dropped to one knee and almost missed the dark, but welcome presence at the back of his mind. Stupid brat, why must you always get us into these situations? You'd better appreciate this. Dark red chakra erupted from Naruto's body. The wound at his side stopped bleeding and began to close. Oddly, his features remained unchanged. It seemed as though the Kyuubi had only given him a chakra boost, rather than the higher-level body altering. No real matter. If he wasn't exhausted to begin with, he wouldn't have been stuck on the defensive the whole time. Naruto's opponent was already sending another blade at him, only now it was moving slower to the genin's eyes. With a chakra-powered jump, the boy leapt up, ran across the top of the blade, and hit the ground running on the other side. In an instant, he was on top of his enemy. Though the missing-nin was now forced into close-range combat, he actually seemed pleased for some reason. "Ha, 'bout time, brat. I expected you to use it sooner, bu." The man's thoughts broke off as he watched Naruto form a Rasengan with one hand. It was twice as large as a normal Rasengan and was the same dark red as the swirling aura covering the boy's body. Tsurugi cursed, knowing there was hardly anyone on the planet, even in Akatsuki, who could survive a direct blow from that thing. He ran his palm along his own blade and began gathering chakra into the pooling blood. Naruto rushed him, his blue eyes seeming to glow with demonic fury. Tsurugi brought his blade to bear as an impromptu shield against the boy's jutsu, even as the chakra in his free hand molded into a dark sigil of some sort. The dark Rasengan slammed into the carbon steel of the sword, immediately drilling into it. The massive blade held for an instant, then it was torn apart with a hideous metallic shrieking noise. The pieces were flung in all directions as semi-molten globs. It didn't matter to Tsurugi. The sword had done its job of interrupting the vessel's attack long enough for the missing-nin to counter. As the man swept his hand in to attack the blonde's abdomen, he was vaguely disturbed that the kid's jutsu had barely lost any form, even after shredding 45 pounds of high-grade carbon steel. No matter. This fight was over. Tsurugi's hand slammed into Naruto's abdomen, directly over the seal on his stomach that kept the Kyuubi imprisoned. The sigil burned right through his orange jacket and bonded with his flesh directly on top of the Yondaimi's seal. Stunned, Naruto jumped back from his opponent. He was surprised to note the man do the same. Tsurugi stood there, not at all concerned about the loss of his sword. In fact, he seemed rather smug that he landed that one blow. What the hell is this guy waiting for? The genin wondered. A sudden jolt in his stomach caused Naruto to look down at the wicked-looking mark on his abdomen. A queasy lurching feeling rippled through his guts. What's that? That feeling, that sigil. It looks familiar. No. A demon seal. But how? Damnation. Boy, listen to me. Let out all of my chakra. Burn it all off now. You have to do it now. Boy, do you hear me? We're dead if you don't get rid of it. Naruto wasn't able to hear the demon fox's bellows over the strange roaring in his head that grew moment by moment. His body felt strange. It felt like he was being tickled, yet also like he had to puke at the same time. His limbs became heavier and he dropped to one knee without realizing it. Spasms and jerks wormed their way through the muscles all throughout his body. They were becoming more intense as the seconds passed. Wah! Naruto's voice clogged up. Damn it, he couldn't even talk. What the hell did that guy do to him? Hey, let me guess. You're wondering what that thing was, right? Tsurugi asked, his arms crossed over his chest and wearing a smug expression. Naruto could only glare as his jaw began clenching tighter and tighter against his will. No worries, brat, you'll find out soon enough. The spasms were growing. They were starting to hurt. They were starting to hurt a lot. Confused and unable to move, Naruto could only kneel helplessly as his arms and legs began twitching violently. Even his neck was jerking a bit. Damn, if only the fox could help him. Obviously it couldn't, or he wouldn't be sitting here like this in the dirt. The spasms stopped. Before Naruto could feel relief, fire seemed to spread through his veins. It felt like someone had mixed vinegar and baking soda inside his body, one of the few science facts Naruto knew, which he'd learned for its messy prank potential. Right now, it felt like his blood was foaming and bubbling and trying to boil its way right out his skin. The pressure in his veins was growing. His muscles were swelling like overfilled balloons all over his body. It was growing too much. His body couldn't take it. What the hell was happening to him? Hey, any minute now, brat, any minute and you. With a wet, ripping sound, the larger muscles in Naruto's arms, his upper legs, his torso, and his back exploded as fiery, chaotic chakra tore its way out of his body. Blood splattered everywhere on the ground as the energy flew outwards. The greenish-gray chakra ripped up the ground all around him as it twisted and coiled on itself. The boy felt a single moment of horrifying agony and then he was down, still as death. The Akatsuki stared at the target, dumbstruck at the sight. The chakra continued to flow from the boy in torrents for several moments before it died down. A pool of blood started to spread under the brat. The missing-nin couldn't believe that the seal had done this to the vessel. He was about to go and see if he could keep the target alive when the earth shuddered underneath him. The bizarre chakra had caught both Jiraiya and his opponent off guard. The Sannin had taken one look at Naruto's body and lost his temper. You two just made a huge mistake, the hermit growled at the woman thing, who couldn't muster up the usual smirk due to the target's state. Jiraiya merely bit his thumb and smeared it on his hand before slamming it into the ground. Kachiyose no Jutsu, summoning skill. The androgynous Akatsuki only had a chance to see an enormous cloud of ninja smoke, before a gigantic webbed foot flew out of it and landed on her. Jiraiya ignored the sickening crunch as Gamabunta landed directly on top of his opponent. As far as he was concerned, that was simply one down, one to go. He turned and gave the male attacker a look of unrestrained fury. Shit, Tsurugi snarled as he jumped back to the tree line. This was not how the mission was supposed to go. They let their egos get in the way when they made the deal for the seals and blindly assumed that their benefactors were actually helping them. The missing-nin looked from the bloodied boy to the Sannin and his toad. He had to suppress a shudder at the look of raw fury in the hermit's eyes. Even on his best day, Tsurugi would have a hard time beating any of the three legendaries, assuming he even could. Gamabunta rarely listened to Jiraiya, but when they did work together they were nigh unbeatable except by Orochimaru and his snake or possibly Itachi-san. I shouldn't fight. Besides, we can't risk the target's life any further. I guess we'll have to. Tsurugi noticed for the first time that his partner was absent. His eyes traced past Jiraiya and noticed part of an Akatsuki cloak sticking out from underneath Gamabunta's foot. Even as he caught sight of it, the toad lifted his paw up and wiped what was left of the missing-nin off on a couple trees nearby, muttering about stepping in something nasty. Time to retreat. Jiraiya watched the man chuck a hasty smoke bomb and run before it had even exploded. He waited till the man's panicked chakra faded into the distance, before diving towards his student. Naruto? Naruto, are you Kami-sama? The Sannin trailed off, feeling a cold, sick spot growing in his stomach. The boy was shredded. He looked like somebody had gone gung-ho with a blender all over his body. He was lying in a pool of his own blood that was still growing. His blonde hair looked neon compared to his ashy blue skin. He's dead, Jiraiya thought. He couldn't help but stare for a moment longer, until Gamabunta's voice jolted him out of his stupor. Jiraiya, why did you summon me? We're in the middle of nowhere and I stepped in something nasty. What's going on? The toad bellowed, taking a drag off his enormous pipe. Jiraiya didn't answer immediately. Instead he was praying to every god and deity in existence as he leaned his face over Naruto's mouth. A moment later and he was thanking them all as he felt the faintest breath against the whiskers on his face. Thank the kami he hadn't been able to shave for the past few days. The hermit ripped off one of the sashes on his outfit and tore it into hunks. He was going to give Tsunade a huge kiss and a giant tub of sake when he got back to thank her for all those times when they were young and she'd insisted that she teach at least him basic first aid. He was never going to tease her about her medical skills again. Who's that you got there, Jiraiya? They look pretty mangled, Gamabunta said as he leaned his huge, scarred face down to look at what appeared to be a pile of raw meat with blonde hair on top of it. Jiraiya took the chunks of cloth and formed tourniquets at the top of Naruto's arms and legs. If he lived, hopefully the fox could repair any damage to his limbs. It wasn't like they were getting much circulation anyways, the hermit grimly noted. When he caught up to the man that did this to his student. It's Naruto, the Sannin distantly said as he ripped open the boy's shredded jacket. He cursed and fought the urge to lose his dinner. The boy's muscles were destroyed. There was no other word for the scale of damage done to his body. Though, shredded, pureed, torn to ribbons from the inside out, all came to his mind. There was a huge breeze as Gamabunta reacted to the sight of his youngest summoner with a sharp intake of breath. Kami, Jiraiya, is he going to survive? The boss toad asked, an unusual note of worry in his deep, bellowing voice. I have no idea, the hermit answered as he shoved a blood-stopping pill or three into the boy's mouth. Seeing the bleeding slow down to a dripping pace rather than a steady flow, he reached into his pouch for a soldier pill. He was just about to force that into the boy's mouth when his eyes glanced down at the mark covering Naruto's abdomen. He jerked the pill away like his hand had been burned. What is it? Gamabunta asked. I don't know. There's some sort of seal messing up the Yondaimes. Something screwing his chakra up. He would have to hold off giving the boy any chakra supplements until he had the Godem check him out. Boss Toad, I need to get the boy back to Konoha. Only Tsunade can help him. Jiraiya yelled as he took off his outer robes and wrapped them firmly around Naruto. He lifted the boy into his arms and leapt atop the giant frog. The boy seemed much lighter than usual. Alright, but I'm only doing this for the kid. Hang on. Gamabunta roared as he jumped over a quarter a mile in the Hidden Leaf's general direction. Jiraiya channeled his chakra into his feet to stick to the toad's skin. Carefully, he swayed and moved in time with the toad's leaps, knowing sudden movements would only worsen his student's condition. It couldn't be helped though. Speed was more important than being careful. Jiraiya could only pray that Tsunade could save the boy. He couldn't handle losing another student before their life even started. Unseen to any of them, the dark-cloaked figure of Tsurugi had doubled back to the campground in time to see the massive outline of the toad disappearing over the starlit horizon. Shit, this plan is totally screwed, the large man grumbled as he walked over to the bloody ground where the target had lain. He withdrew a kunai and wiped the flat of the blade along the stained dirt. Standing up again, he wrapped the blade in a cloth before tucking it away. Without another moment's hesitation, the man jumped into the trees and raced along, following the toad's general route. It wasn't exactly hard to track them with the earthquakes Gamabunta was making. He'd get a general idea of where they were going before reporting in. Not once did he glance to his partner's final resting spot on the side of several pine trees. There's no love lost between Akatsuki agents. Hopefully the higher-ups will come up with a better plan next time, Tsurugi grimly thought as he raced through the dark. Dawn was just breaking over the peaceful hidden village of Leaf. The early pink and gray light made a beautiful contrast when seen through the many trees that grew throughout the village. The sun's earliest rays were just creeping across the Hokage monument, where 5 faces carved into the cliffside stared out over the Leaf. Many residents who were up at this time often took a moment to just stare at the beauty of their home. Yamanaka Ino was not one of those people. Ino hadn't changed much since Sasuke's defection. She was a bit taller now and she had more meat on her. She had allowed her blonde hair to grow long again, though not to impress anyone this time. She still wore her purple combat dress and bandages. Her face was a little sharper, as some of her baby fat had faded away. She was also becoming healthy in certain areas as well. She was on her way to becoming a very voluptuous woman. That fact mattered little to her though, as there was nobody in the village that she wanted staring at her curves. The blonde girl slowly stumbled down the stairs of her home into the back room of the first-floor flower shop. She didn't have any missions with Asuma-sensei today, so her parents had told her to open the shop this morning. Ino hated getting up early. Her mood was made worse since she hadn't slept very well last night. She kept smelling blood in her dream and felt like her legs were off balance the whole time. It had been pretty weird. Yawning, the genin grabbed a watering can and stuck it in one of the large tubs in the back of the shop. As she watched the water slowly fill up the can, the pretty blonde wondered at her dream. She rarely dreamt much, and when she did it was almost always something bad. Her family's main jutsu worked on the principle of invading someone else's mind. She had often wondered if her family sometimes had premonitions as a side effect of opening up the mind like that. She always thought to ask her father about it whenever she had the odd dreams, but she also seemed to forget every time before she could talk to him about it. Maybe I'll remember today, Ino thought, too tired to actually speak out loud. She reached over to turn the faucet off and lugged the full can out of the tub. A sudden tremor stopped her. She blinked, looked around, and shrugged before reaching for the can again. A greater tremor stopped her hand again. The genin stared as yet another vibration rippled past. This one was great enough to actually form ripples across the water in the can. Slowly, she walked over to the back door and looked out the small window in it. A rumble strong enough to rattle the glass shook the shop. With some apprehension, the blonde reached out and opened the door to look outside. Her jaw dropped. That was a big frog. The massive red toad had just hopped over the outer walls and was looking for a clear spot to jump to deeper in the village. Even as Ino watched, it seemed to find one and took a massive leap into the air. Ino watched as it landed about half a mile away from her home. The rumble felt like an earthquake and her legs wobbled under her as she grabbed the doorframe to keep her balance. A flash of déjà vu hit her. This was the weird feeling she had in her dreams all last night. Then where was the smell of blood? Too late, Ino realized that not only had the tremors stopped, but the toad was in mid-flight again. The massive frog hit the ground 2 streets from her house. The ground seemed to turn to jelly as she was knocked onto her butt. Rubbing her shapely posterior, the blonde stared up at the frog in awe. She had been unconscious during the sound invasion and hadn't seen any of the snake summons that had attacked their city, so it was a definite first for her as she watched the giant toad. There seemed to be an odd-looking man riding on top of it. His white-haired flashed in the morning sunlight and Ino could just barely make out the odd red lines on his face. He was holding a bundle of cloth that was covered in blotchy red marks. A spiky mess of yellow and red straw? No, hair. Yellow and red hair stuck out of the bundle. Something about the man and his cargo seemed familiar to Ino. Why did giant toads, a white-haired man, and spiky blonde hair ring such a loud bell in her head? All in an instant it hit her. Flashes and snippets of conversation between her and her friend, rival Haruno Sakura floated past her. Learning that each genin of Team 7 was being taught by a Sannin. Hearing from Sakura that her teammate Naruto had left with the toad hermit Jiraiya on a training mission. Feeling jealously that the blonde idiot had such a powerful sensei, while her own spend more time playing games with her lazy teammate, Shikamaru. Naruto's grinning face as he kicked the crap out of Kiba and, later on, Neji. His blonde, spiky hair shining in the bright light. Spiky, blonde? Naruto. With a sudden queasy feeling, Ino realized who was in that bundle and just what those red stains were. The whole time it had taken her to come to that conclusion had only been a couple seconds. Gamabunta, she now recognized the pipe and sword from the history books at the academy, was just starting his next jump. Without really thinking, Ino was jumping up and running in the direction of the hospital, knowing that was the toad's destination. She didn't even pause to close the door behind her. She looked up as the massive toad leapt over her head and further into the village. She wasn't even sure why she was doing this, but that didn't slow her run in the least. One of the rookie 9 was in trouble and she was going to make sure he was alright. At least, she was pretty sure that was the reason. The 5th Hokage, the slug hermit Tsunade, would have agreed with Ino that mornings were evil incarnate. She had managed to get totally drunk last night and, as Shizune had warned her, she was now paying for it. She slouched at the desk of her office and glared at the paperwork that refused to go away. It was morning, she had a hangover, and now she had a treaty with a minor feudal lord to negotiate on top of it all. What else could go wrong? Hokage-sama, an Anbu yelled as he burst through the door. Tsunade's eye twitched as the noise reverberated in her skull. Yes? She managed to hiss out between gritted teeth. The Anbu ignored the tone that had made stronger men than him flinch away in terror. Hokage-sama, Jiraiya-sama has returned. So soon? Tsunade asked, some apprehension growing in her voice. Her old teammate had said he wasn't going to return for another year or so. If he was back now. He came in riding on Gamabunta-sama just 5 minutes ago. He told me to get you. Hokage-sama, his student is wounded, the Anbu finished carefully, knowing the Godime's relationship with the Uzumaki brat. What? Tsunade tried to yell, but it came out as more of a strangled gasp. Her hangover was forgotten in a rush of adrenaline. How badly? Hokage-sama, he's critical. Jiraiya had to restart his heart once on the way back to the village. Shizune-san is trying to treat him now, but shush, the Anbu was cut off as Tsunade left. She didn't leave through the door though. The Hokage had turned and simply smashed through the window as she leapt to the streets below. The Anbu rushed to the empty window, along with the guards who had came in at the loud crashing noise. One of them let out an impressed whistle as they watched their leader blur across the rooftops to the hospital. Damn, I'm never getting between her and that kid. Ever, the man said in awe. The other two Anbu could only nod in reply. Shizune worked desperately to save her young friend's life. She had cut away his clothes to see the injuries underneath. Naruto's gaudy orange outfit now lay in a pile of red strips next to her. Behind her, Jiraiya hovered well out of the way, but ready to assist if he could. He was present mostly to see if there was anything he could do about that seal on the boy. As long as it was on him, the fox wouldn't be able to heal Naruto. The hermit had figured that out on the way back when he realized his student wasn't healing right. The genin had given him a terrible scare when his breathing had suddenly stopped 10 miles out from the village. Performing CPR on his student while on top of a gigantic, anxious toad was not a pleasant memory to the man. It did seem like the fox was able to at least slow the boy's bleeding and to force him to produce more blood. Naruto had lost more blood than there was in the bodies of 2 full-grown men over the course of the trip. Jiraiya was covered in it up and down his front, and Gamabunta's forehead had been a darker stain of red before he disappeared. The toad hermit only hoped Tsunade had totally gotten over her blood fear. He was worried about developing a phobia to the stuff himself. He'd watched as Shizune gently laid the boy out in the center of the large room. They were in the largest healing room in the building. The room itself was 50 by 50 feet in size, and the entire floor was covered in extremely complex seals and rune script. It was probably the largest and most complicated set of seals Jiraiya had ever seen. Naruto lay in the center of it all. His deathly pale face contrasted sharply with the seals lying all around him. Shizune was trying her strongest healing jutsu on the boy's chest, trying to repair his most vital areas. Jiraiya worried that the seal might interfere even with that, but he didn't have the power alone to break the damn thing. He'd have to let Shizune do her best to heal the boy until Su. The doors of the room burst open with enough force to drive them into the walls where the hinges had swung them. Speak of the devil, Jiraiya thought in relief. For the first time in hours, he felt that Naruto might actually have a chance at survival. Tsunade hadn't even paused as she rushed into the room, several medic nins trailing behind her. Shizune's back was to her and she couldn't truly see Naruto from this angle. She crossed over and walked around her student, ignoring Jiraiya's warning. She dropped her medical bag, which she had swiped from a passing nurse earlier. Naruto was shredded. His whole body had rips and tears along it, like some wild animal had done its best to make him into ground meat. She could even see bone exposed in some places. And the blood, the beginnings of the old fear began to well up in the Sannin. In her mind's eye she saw Nawaki and Dan's faces floating past her in a sea of red. Now Naruto's face was joining them. Another of her loved ones dying. Shizune's frustrated tears snapped her out of it. Tsunade shook her head a bit and looked to her student's progress. It wasn't much. No matter how hard she was trying, her apprentice couldn't get Naruto's flesh to mend for more than a second before it reopened. The Godem kneeled down and, needing her considerable strength, pulled Shizune's hands away from the boy. The young medic nin gasped at the sight of her mentor, not even noticing her loud entrance in her concentration. "I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama. Nothing I do is working. Something seems to be blocking any jutsu I try," the dark-haired woman said, almost hysterical at the lack of progress. Now that Shizune was leaning back, the Hokage could actually see the extent of Naruto's injuries. A chill ran through her as she realized the boy should have been dead minutes after he was wounded. Something seemed to be forcing his blood production into overdrive to keep up with the constant loss. "Must be Kyuubi," Tsunade muttered, channeling chakra into her hands and using a diagnostic jutsu. Sweeping her hands across the boy's body, she realized why Shizune was so damn upset. Something was blocking her jutsu and disrupting the chakra as it entered Naruto's body. Her eyes drifted past the red-black wound on his chest and to his surprisingly uninjured abdomen. She wasn't exactly sure what she was seeing, but she knew that the Kyuubi's seal shouldn't look like that. There was a glowing red seal surrounding it and worming its way through the original like a parasitic worm. The chakra in her hand disrupted further the lower she moved her hand until her entire jutsu dispelled as she passed over the seal. Tsunade stared at it in shock. If that thing disrupted chakra so badly that it messed up jutsu for other people, what the hell was it doing to Naruto's body on the inside? She made a couple quick conclusions as she stared at the script. "Somebody get Jiraiya," she bellowed to the medic nins that were staring at the boy. "I'm right here, Tsunade-hime. No need to yell," the hermit grumbled as he stepped forward. "Why the hell did you leave this thing on him?" the Sannin yelled. "Because I wanted you to look him over first before I tried anything." "You're the medic, not me," Jiraiya replied with a calm he didn't feel. "Then get your bleeding ass over here and help me break this seal." The Hokage roared at the top of her lungs. Everyone in the room jumped, except the person she was yelling at. Her old teammate walked up and bit his thumb, while pulling a small brush from his pocket. Tsunade grabbed a sponge from her bag and began to clean away the blood on Naruto's abdomen. "Did you try blood-stopping pills?" she asked Shizune in a terse voice, though far gentler than the one she used with Jiraiya. Her apprentice shook her head. "No, Jiraiya-sama said he's already given him 6 on the way here. I didn't want to risk blood clots since he's not healing right. If one should lodge in his brain." Shizune trailed off, not needed to finish her statement. She scooted back so Jiraiya had enough room to start making seals surrounding the sigil on the boy's stomach. Tsunade gave a worried glance to her old teammate. 6? she asked in disbelief. The toad hermit only nodded shortly. The Godem shook her head and said to Shizune, "Get some sutures, clamps, and any sort of advanced healing solution you can find. We need to stop the bleeding as soon as possible." Her apprentice nodded and rushed out of the room. "You know, to break this thing, it's gonna drain all of our chakra. You won't have enough energy left for healing jutsu afterwards," Jiraiya commented casually as he wrote. "I know, but that thing is screwing up his inner coils somehow and keeping the fox from healing him. I think it caused the Kyuubi's chakra and Naruto's own to react violently to each other. If we can't use jutsu, then we'll stitch him up manually until the fox can heal him," Tsunade said. She used a scalpel to make a cut in her own finger and began to ink out seals of her own onto the boy. Jiraiya nodded. His old teammate's analysis of the seal just supported his own conclusions. Orochimaru would be salivating if he knew these things existed. Shrugging off thoughts of his old rival, the Sannin bent down and continued his work. Ino carefully stepped over the broken glass of the Konoha General's automatic doors. It looked like a rampaging bull had busted in here just a couple minutes ahead of her. The hospital lobby hadn't changed much since the last time she had been here, except for the breezy new entrance. A couple janitors passed by her as she walked up to the receptionist. Their faces looked horrified at the destruction. Another set of doors lay on the ground further past the information desk. From her previous visits, Ino knew the hall behind those doors led into the advanced healing rooms. She had been there once before when Choji had been heavily injured during Sasuke's defection. From what she could see, the destruction continued down there with harried medic nins and nurses running all over the place. She sighed as she stepped up to the receptionist. You could always tell when Naruto was in town. Ino spent a couple minutes futilely trying to get the woman's attention. Since the receptionist was currently arguing with several visitors over the safety standards of the hospital, it was probably going to be a while. The blonde genin gave up and walked past the desk to where several people were only now picking up the demolished doors to the inner hallways. Inching her way past the workers and panicked doctors running amok, Ino made her way down the hall at a much slower pace than her panicked run to get here. It had taken her a good 15 minutes or so to reach the hospital. The toad had been long gone by the time she got there, though it left several enormous footprints in front of the medical building. As she meandered through the hallways, occasionally pressing herself against the wall to dodge medics rushing back and forth, she found that following the trail of chaos was much easier than actually trying to remember where the treatment rooms were. Maybe Jiraiya-sama had been a little panicked on his way in? It didn't take long for her to find the ward she suspected Naruto was in, but she was stopped at an Anbu checkpoint at the beginning of the wing by a couple guards. "Sorry, but no one under Junin rank is allowed through here," one of them said. Glaring at the man's bird mask, Ino demanded, "Why not? It's not like the Hokage is here or anything." Both Anbu's sweat dropped. It was hard to believe there was anyone in Konoha who didn't recognize Tsunade's signature destruction. Then again, this girl just might be lucky. Both the guards felt a bit of envy at the thought of being ignorant to the Godime's temper. Actually, Hokage-sama is back there right now. She's treating Jiraiya-sama's student, the Uzumaki boy, the other Anbu, who wore an elephant mask, replied. Uzumaki? Oh, you mean Naruto? Ino exclaimed, not really that familiar with Naruto's surname as it wasn't part of any well-known clan. He's really here then? I have to see him. We took the Chunin exams together a couple years ago. The Anbu in the bird mask shook his head. Like I said, we can't let anyone back. But, please, he's a friend of mine. I just want to see if he's alright. Ino pleaded. She was fibbing a little on the friend part. Not that she and Naruto were enemies or anything, though she was still a little sore that his encouragement had helped Sakura fight her to a draw in the exams and kept her from going to the finals. He was still a comrade, even if he wasn't a close one. The rookie 9 from that year and Teen Guide tended to watch out for each other, even if it was at a distance. Even the colder types like Neji and Shino would back up one of their own, even if they didn't act like they were concerned. Ino was no different. She had to at least make sure their comrade was going to be okay. Look, we really are sorry, the elephant mask began, but we can't just let anyone come wandering back. The kid is busted up really bad and the Hokage needs to work uninterrupted. We're not even allowed to let lower-ranked medic nins back. Ino felt her hopes drop. Damn it, the man had a point. But now she was even more worried. Was Naruto really injured so badly that the best medic on the continent had to work totally undisturbed? Can you at least check and see how he's doing? The blonde girl asked. We can't leave our posts, the bird mask replied, a hint of sympathy coming into his voice. Anbu knew more than anyone else what it was like to have severely injured comrades. Their missions were the deadliest, after all. Isn't there any way I can get back there? Ino yelled in frustration. Well, Elephant started, scratching the chin of his mask and thought. If you had someone of sufficient rank accompany you, maybe. Do I count? A deep, lazy voice asked. Ino whirled around as both Anbu stood up even straighter. Kakashi-san, the guards said in a stereo effect. Ino narrowed her eyes at the tall man in front of her. Yes, she remembered him. He was at the Chunin preliminaries. He'd been one of the Junin sensei that stopped Neji from killing Hinata. Later he'd held Naruto back from chasing after Lee when the genin was wounded by that sand freak. She also remembered him at the finals, when he and Sasuke had arrived late. Taking in the masked man's lean and muscular form, she wondered if he was here to see Naruto too. Hitaki Kakashi observed the 3 ninjas in front of him with his single visible eye. He'd been at the memorial, staring at Obito-san's name, when he felt the ever-increasing earthquakes. He'd recognized Gamabunta immediately, having seen his sensei, the Yondaime, summon him on multiple occasions. The silver-haired man had watched the giant frog cross the village until it stopped at the medical complex. Moments later, it had dispelled in a cloud of smoke. Kakashi wasn't called a genius for nothing in reading. Underneath, he'd come to the conclusion that either Jiraiya or Naruto was severely injured for the boss Toad to come riding into town in such a fashion. Knowing the mysterious Akatsuki organization was after Naruto, he'd concluded that it was far more likely his former subordinate needed medical attention than the infamous Jiraiya. Wanting to check up on him and to see his student after so long, the Junin had headed off at a good clip to the hospital. On the way, he'd been easily passed by a frantic-looking Tsunade. That made him more worried than anything else. "So," the copy ninja drawled, his semi-fake lazy attitude showing. "Gonna let us through?" "Of course, Kakashi-san," the bird mask replied. "Will you be taking the girl with you?" Kakashi gave Ino a glance. It was pretty odd that the Yamanaka girl was here. Last he knew, she hadn't spoken more than a couple sentences to Naruto the entire time he'd lived in Konoha. If it was Sasuke, he'd understand, but Naruto? Oh well, if she wanted to tag along, that was fine by him. Besides, it looked like she might resort to using volume as the weapon of choice, and every member of Team 10 turned pale at the thought of Ino's vicious tongue. Asuma-san told horror stories of his students' antics. "Sure," the Junin said, in an easygoing way. "Why not? I'm sure Naruto'll appreciate visitors." The Anbu nodded and moved aside to let them through. They immediately jumped back into position to block a harried-looking Chunin who was carrying a message to the Hokage from the Fire Council about property damage costs. The Genin and Junin walked along the hall in silence for a minute or so before Ino turned to Kakashi. "Thanks. They wouldn't even tell me how he was doing," the blonde said. Kakashi looked down at her and gave her his trademark half-circle eye smiles. "No problem," he said, with a nearly visible heart floating above his head. "I'm worried about the goofball too." Ino gave him a grateful smile. The two walked the rest of the way in companionable silence. It wasn't very hard to spot the room Naruto was in. There was a large hole in the wall where two double doors used to be. Ino wondered a moment at all the demolished doors she'd seen today before she stepped up to the doorway. She wasn't exactly sure what she was seeing at first. It was a large room, with seals covering the entire floor. That much she got. It was the strange object lying in the center of the room that she didn't quite grasp. It looked like a pile of shredded meat. What confused her was the blonde straw at the end of it. It looked like someone had shaped some raw beef into a vaguely human form and put a blonde wig on top of it. Blonde. Ino must have made some sort of sound, but she wasn't aware of it. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the Maya, the person on the floor. She wasn't aware of the other people in the room, only the person lying there. A dead person. There was no way anyone could look like that and be alive, not even a shinobi. The scent of blood filled her nostrils. Ino barely felt it when long arms wrapped themselves around her mouth and waist and pulled her from the doorway. She didn't know it, but Kakashi was doing the same thing to her that he had done to his blonde student at the Chunin preliminaries when Lee was hurt. The Genin wasn't aware of the Junin leading her to the bench built into the wall beside the room and gently forcing her to sit on it. It was only when he snapped his fingers in front of her eyes that she finally focused on him. "Ino-san, you all there?" he quietly asked. She idly noted that he had to squat to be anywhere near eye level with her sitting. "Naruto?" That was Naruto. She choked out. The silver-haired man nodded. "I'm going to go help them, Ino-san. Both Jiraiya-sama and the Hokage are running low on chakra and they might need someone to fill in." "Are you going to be alright here?" Kakashi asked. It wasn't very fair to leave the girl alone, but at the same time he needed to help his former student. The two Sannin in the room were burning through most of their chakra trying to break some sort of seal on the boy, and they would probably need another person with high chakra levels to assist them. And as cold as it sounded, Ino was ninja. She'd have to learn how to deal with the gruesome side of being a shinobi sooner or later. If she couldn't take seeing a comrade mangled in a hospital, then she'd probably wind up making a fatal mistake on a mission if she saw the same thing in the field. Those who don't care about their comrades are worse than trash. "Hi, Obito-san. I know I'm being hypocritical, but I can't watch her until I'm sure I'm not needed to help Naruto," Kakashi thought as memories of his best friend floated through his mind. "Help? Yes. Go help him," Ino said, snapping out of her stupor long enough to shove the copy nin's shoulder towards the door. She barely made the tall man wobble even in an off-balanced squat, but her message got through. Kakashi gave her one last eye smile before he hurried through the doors. "Tough girl," he thought as he caught Shizun's eye. Ino stared after the copy nin for a few seconds. "Don't worry," she told herself. "Naruto has two Sannin, a medic team, and the copy ninja looking after him. He'll be alright." Naruto? Naruto was a pile of ground-up meat lying on the cold floor looking like he was on a butcher's block. The thought hadn't yet fully sunk in before Ino was rushing to the restroom just around the corner. Her last coherent thought before she emptied her stomach in one of the stalls was that she would probably never be able to watch Choji devour steaks again. It had been almost 10 minutes and the damn seal still wasn't breaking, even with two Sannin channeling their chakra into the blasted thing. Jiraiya had no idea what that sigil was or who created it, but he was cursing its existence with every fiber of his soul. Both he and Tsunade had chakras swirling around them, making a windy roar in the room, and were channeling the energy into the string of seals that led up to the genin. At least Shizune was able to get in there and start suturing the worst of the boy's injuries together. The bleeding had noticeably slowed, at least in the chest area, but if that seal wouldn't break, the fox would never be able to heal his student. And if the demon can't do its thing, Naruto will die, the Sannin thought grimly. If they only had someone with high chakra. Shizune was skilled, but like most medics she had far more control than reserves when it came to chakra. None of the medics in the building had the kind of power needed. They didn't need a cage-level shinobi, but a very strong individual was still required nonetheless. Not for the first, nor the last time, Jiraiya lamented the Yondaimi's death. This seal would be child's play if they had his power backing them. If only Arashi-kun was alive. Or even, Hitaki Kakashi walked in the doorway. His visible eye had an unusual tenseness to it as he looked at his former student. Without a word, he pulled his forehead protector up, exposing his Sharingan-enhanced left eye, and walked towards Shizune to see what he could do. At that moment, Jiraiya felt like yanking the Junin's mask down and kissing him till his mismatched eyes crossed. Kakashi-kun, the toad hermit yelled over the noise of the chakra, "We could use a hand if you got one." "Where do you need me?" The copy ninja replied. "Grab a brush and start inking a line of seals with your blood out from Naruto's chest." Tsunade ordered, sweat running down her eyes from the strain she was under. Kakashi took a few moments to eye the setup with his Sharingan. He was standing just in front of Shizune, which was towards the entrance of the room. To his left, Jiraiya was crouching at the edge of the room, his hands planted on the floor. A thin line of glowing seals made their way across the floor and its permanent black seals, to Naruto where they circled the red sigil that intertwined with the Kyuubi seal. To his right, another line of seals led to Tsunade, who was mirroring her fellow Sannin. Kakashi closed his normal eye and focused on the chakra radiating from the script. The seal set was advanced, but linear. Both Jiraiya and Tsunade were using the same seals, even if they were at different positions to the boy. If they were using the same seals, then he could make an identical set and join right in. Kakashi was no seal expert, especially compared to a Sannin, but he had enough skill to use these without risking further harm to the boy. "Got it," the Junin said as his Sharingan finished recording the seal order. He reached into Shizune's open medical bag lying beside her and pilfered one of her thin brushes. He carefully stepped past the woman and knelt across Naruto from her. He nicked his finger with a kunai and began to carefully ink out seals on the boy's stomach. Shizune didn't even notice him as she carefully finished closing off a severed vein in the genin's upper shoulder. It took several tense minutes to ink out the entire line of seals. Finally, Kakashi discarded the brush and gathered chakra into his hands before slamming the palms onto the marks he'd just made. The kanji glowed blue leading up the boy and the energy joined the Sannins in combating the dark sigil. At first the fresh chakra didn't seem to do anything, but after a couple moments there was a noticeable change in the strange seal. Jiraiya grinned viciously as he felt the sigil give. It was like poking a finger through thick styrofoam. Even with 3 powerful ninja focusing their chakra into it, the sigil still resisted several minutes before it cracked completely. Shizune paused as she watched the glowing red seal dim to black before breaking apart and fading from the boy's skin. As she watched, the Kyuubi seal slowly reformed into its normal state. She laid her suture and needle down and tried a diagnostic jutsu on the boy. The chakra worked like a charm. "Tsunade-sama, the jutsu are working now," Shizune called to her mentor. Her voice felt louder than usual, now that the noise from the chakra winds had died down. The Hokage got to her feet and staggered over to Naruto. "Let me see," she said as she performed the same technique as her student. Her eyes closed in concentration, but they snapped open in surprise. "Damn it to hell," Tsunade muttered. Sensing 2 presences hovering behind her, she turned to look over her shoulder. "Hitaki-san, if you had come 10 minutes later, Naruto would have died." Thank you. And I don't mean that just as the Hokage, the Sannin said. Kakashi gave a nonchalant shrug. Glad I showed up on time for once, he calmly replied. Tsunade noticed that he didn't cover the Sharingan. In fact, he was watching both her and Shizune's hand motions very carefully with it. How is he? How bad is it? Jiraiya asked. Tsunade sighed and motioned to Shizune to keep stitching the boy. She turned to look at the two men. Whatever made that seal knew just how to kill a demon vessel in one strike. The Yondaime's seal allows the Kyuubi's chakra to mix freely with Naruto's, with the only limit being how much the fox is willing to give up or how much Naruto's body can handle. This mixing of human and demon chakra isn't harmful in any way to him, even without the seal in place. The seal just acts as a one-way floodgate and the two chakras merge naturally in his inner coils. Tsunade turned back and began to perform a delicate healing jutsu. She trailed the glowing energy over the areas that Shizune had stitched up. The boy's torn flesh began to sluggishly mold back together, though not as much as it should have. That thing though, I don't know what it is or does exactly, but I do know what it did to Naruto. It mangled his chakra somehow, right? Jiraiya asked, while crossing his arms in thought. Kakashi continued to watch both the stitching and healing jutsu with undeterred focus. Much worse than just that, Tsunade said. The new seal warped the original seal to cause the demonic chakra to react violently with the human chakra. It was like mixing potassium with water. Shizune looked up from her work with a shocked look on her face. She was the only one with enough real chemistry knowledge to know what that meant. She grimaced and returned to her work. Naruto's bleeding had slowed enough that the tourniquets could be removed. Looking at the blue-white flesh of his arms and legs, the medic Nin prayed that the Kyuubi would be able to restore function to the boy's limbs. A shinobi would rather die than lose the use of their arms and legs. Basically, it caused the chakra to explosively tear out of him. The damage to his muscle groups came from the inside of his body outwards, destroying them almost completely. Tsunade continued as she traced a line of stitches along Naruto's collarbone. Not only did the chakra destroy his muscles, but it also screwed up his inner coils and acted as a scrambler for any incoming chakra. That's why our healing jutsu had no effect when we first brought him in. I wonder why the hell those bastards used it on him. Jiraiya muttered. Kakashi's ears perked up. Who did this? He asked, though he had a sneaking suspicion he already knew. Jiraiya glanced around and made sure nobody else was in immediate earshot. Akatsuki, he mumbled as he leaned in towards the younger man. The copy Nin only narrowed his eyes and nodded. He had yet to break eye contact with the medic Nin's hands. From the effects you described, I'm guessing the seal was a mistake on their part. The toad hermit continued in a marginally louder tone towards the Hokage. All our information said they wanted Kyuubi, and by proxy Naruto, alive for whatever psycho reason they cooked up. Makes no sense for them to kill him in the middle of nowhere. I thought they were a bit more competent than this, trying out an untested seal out on their main goal. Kakashi muttered, taking in the news. Well, whatever mistakes they made, that thing did a number on his chakra. Even now my healing jutsu isn't having much effect, Tsunade said. We'll have to manually stitch him up before trying any healing. Though it could be because my chakra is so damn low from breaking that seal. Hokage-sama, Kakashi broke in, let me take over for you. I still have most of my chakra left. You'll be able to focus on closing up his critical areas. Tsunade gave the man a critical look. You know medical jutsu? She asked, not having seen such skills anywhere on the elite Junin's rather lengthy profile. Kakashi winked with his normal eye and tapped the left side of his head, next to his Sharingan eye. Tsunade was torn between whacking the man for stealing her technique and relief that he could keep going in her place. She was getting dangerously low on chakra. Alright, but you better have damn good chakra control. Just trail behind Shizune as she works. Don't worry too much if it's not having much of an effect. Just do your best with it and move on. We're just trying to keep him alive for now, the Hokage said. She moved over and let Kakashi kneel next to her. She was only partially surprised when he performed the jutsu near flawlessly and picked up where she left off. Well, at least he'd have that skill if he was ever injured in the field. Hoping the Kyuubi will pick up and repair the kid where we can't. Jiraiya asked, leaning over to watch the assorted ninja work. Absolutely. As it stands, there's no way for Naruto to ever resume active duty if the fox can't undo the destruction done to his system. Hell, he probably won't ever be able to walk again if the Kyuubi can't heal him. What's the extent of the damage? Kakashi asked, as he calmly channeled chakra into the boy's damaged flesh. What isn't damaged is more like it. Tsunade grumbled, though her anger wasn't at the boy. To start with, his inner coils are royally screwed up, even with the Akatsuki seal gone. The demon chakra and human chakra won't work properly together for quite some time. That's what's keeping Kyuubi from healing Naruto right now. The demon can't control any chakra it sends out, keeping it from repairing anything. I'm surprised it was even able to get his blood production up enough to save the boy. Speaking of which, I guess the fox decided to go overboard in the areas it could still affect. The Kyuubi made Naruto's blood production increase over 20 times its natural rate. That's the factor that saved his life. The cost though, is that it stripped his body of almost all its reserves. What's left of his muscle groups have atrophied. If he ever gets back on his feet, he's lost months if not years of physical training. Worse than just that is the damage the tourniquets did. Tsunade gave a look to Jiraiya. They kept blood in him and that kept his body from completely eating itself, but as it is his arms and legs are virtually dead from anoxia. I think the Kyuubi can repair the damage in time, so we'll hold off amputation, but it may be weeks or even months before he regains use of them. He won't be happy about that. That's an understatement, Jiraiya muttered. Oh well, the brat could yell at him as much as he wanted, as long as he was alive to do the yelling. Internal damage is minimal, thank the kami. He's busted a few ribs and cracked a vertebrae, but it's nothing life-threatening. There's not much else, except for his destroyed muscles. The muscular damage extends from the front and back of his upper torso to his upper arms and most of his legs. Those sectors are almost totally destroyed. It's not really a matter of healing as much as regenerating new flesh from scratch. Even I can't do that to another person. If Kyuubi doesn't rebuild his muscle structure, he'll never leave a bed again. Hell, he'll never be able to lift his arms again, Tsunade grimly finished. Well, maybe the demon's taken a liking to the kid, Jiraiya muttered. 3 sets of eyes gave him a look that said, "Did you hit your head?" Sweat dropping, the toad hermit tried to cover for himself. Okay. Well, Kyuubi probably hates Naruto more than any other human except the Yondaime, but even so, it'd be suicidal to not get the boy back into fighting condition. They won't leave off just cause the brat's bedridden. Tsunade hemmed in thought. Well, that's not here and now. Let's finish patching him up and get him to a bed. He needs nutrients badly and I want to get an IV in him as soon as possible. Nobody said anything else as they worked on Naruto. Staring at the wall for 3 hours isn't healthy. Ino had reached that conclusion 2 hours and 35 minutes ago. At least the wall was better than that hanging clock's taunting ticking. This was even worse than waiting on Choji. The Hokage had already healed her teammate by the time she had gotten there and she only had to sit around for a half hour while waiting for him to be moved to a normal hospital room. Besides, she'd had Chomaru for company. Though the clan head was a bit intimidating, he was quite friendly to her and they had passed the time talking about some of Choji and Shikamaru's more amusing antics. She'd never waited while someone was dying though. By herself, no less. The only thing that kept her from storming in there and demanding to know what was going on was the memory of Naruto's decimated form. She had little desire to see that again before he was all comfortably bandaged up. Besides, she might interrupt some delicate procedure that could cost the boy his life and she didn't want that hanging over her head. Still, this waiting was getting to be painful. She would just peek in, see how far along it all was, and sit back down. It's not like it'd be hard to look inside, considering no one had bothered to put the doors back in place. Read. No one was strong enough to dislodge the doors from where Tsunade had embedded them in the walls. Ino had stood and was just leaning to look into the doorway when both Tsunade and Jiraiya came rushing out the room and down the hall. Tsunade was carefully carrying a large, blanket-wrapped bundle. The 2 Sannin disappeared around the corner before Ino could get a word out. She was about to follow them, having a pretty good idea what was in the blanket, what was with Sannins and toting Naruto around like a sack of potatoes, when a large hand landed on her shoulder. Don't worry, he's fine. They're just in a rush to get him into a hospital room and on a nutrient drip or something, Kakashi said. Ino looked up at the tall man and jumped at the sight of his blood-red left eye. The copy nin noticed her stare. Oh, whoops, the Junin said sheepishly, as he pulled his forehead protector back down. Forgot I still had that open. I was wondering why I was getting dizzy. A large sweat drop appeared on the back of Ino's head. What a flake. So he's alright? The genin asked, changing the subject. Kakashi started to answer when he suddenly wobbled on his feet. Ino let out a startled yelp as the large man nearly bowled her over on his way to the floor. Both ninjas were surprised when his fall stopped as the blonde girl caught him under his arm. Years of dragging Choji out of restaurants when the chubby boy had eaten himself halfway to oblivion had paid off. Staggering, Ino managed to get the tall Junin over to the bench she'd been sitting on. Chakra exhaustion? You moron. I thought you're a Junin, for Kami's sake. The girl snarled as she propped the copy ninja's semi-limp form back against the wall. You're supposed to know better, you idiot. Naruto must have rubbed off on you. Nope, I've always acted like this, Kakashi replied with a cheerful little upturn to his visible eye. Ino fixed him with a baleful glare that could have wilted all the flowers in her parents' shop. The copy ninja's eye seemed to smile, even brighter. Pain in the ass, the girl muttered as she sat down next to him. So how is he? Kakashi's eye returned to normal and visibly drooped lower than usual. He's alive. That's really the best we could have hoped for. His muscle structure was destroyed throughout most of his body. Odds are he'll never regain full use of his arms and legs. Even if he does, the injuries have set him back years in physical training. He'll have to reteach his body how to be a shinobi all over again, the Junin said, his voice low with sadness rather than laziness for once. Oh, Ino said in a very small voice. Then his dream. Kakashi nodded. He'll never be strong enough to become Hokage, the copy nin replied, his shoulders sagging. Flashing images of Naruto screaming out Hokage at the top of his impressive lungs moved through Ino's mind. When you thought of Naruto, Hokage was always in there somewhere. Everyone in the Rookie 9 knew he dreamed of being Hokage. Hell, anyone who really knew anything about Naruto knew that. Even in their earliest days at the academy, the hyper-blonde was always spouting off about it. Even if it was just nonsense, at least Naruto was able to dream and work towards his goal. To have that taken away from you completely must be a terrible feeling. But Tsunade-sama was able to heal even Lee. Can't she? Ino trailed off at the look in Kakashi's eye. Even the Godem has limits. Lee was all there, even if he was damaged. There are pieces of Naruto that are simply gone, the Junin sighed. Days like this, he felt all 28 years of his life. He shouldn't feel this tired when he wasn't even 30, damn it. Not all of his exhaustion could be blamed on overusing the Sharingan yet again. Kakashi-san, who did this to him? Ino asked. It was one of the thoughts that had repeated itself like a broken record the hours she'd been waiting. Very dangerous people, was all Kakashi said in reply. At Ino's questioning stare, he sighed. I'm sorry Ino-san, I really am, but I can't tell you anything specific. All I can say is these people have been after him for years and with his injuries, he's a sitting duck. Even the Hokage's Enbu guards might not be able to protect him. If he doesn't recover. Oh, Ino trailed off. They sat in silence for a few minutes longer, before she jumped up. Well, we'll just have to go see him then, she declared. He won't stay down for long. He'll be up and destroying people's eardrums in no time. Even I know you can't keep him from his dream and I barely know the idiot. Kakashi had a surprised look in his slouching eye as he watched the girl in front of him as she scrounged up a crutch from a nearby storage room. Naruto, even if you don't get your dream, you've gained another friend. The tall Junin didn't say a word as Ino fussed about, hauling him up and propping the crutch under his arm. Then again, Kakashi didn't need to say anything, even when Ino grabbed his unoccupied arm and held him up on the other side. His visible eye was upside down and beaming brightly enough to give passing medics sunburns. For a man who never showed his face, Kakashi was surprisingly expressive. Alright, now you don't move. Hi, I'll be back as soon as I find Sakura and get some flowers. I'll see if I can find another crutch for you while I'm out. Ino left the strange Junin in a chair next to Naruto's bed as she went to find her rival. She was relieved to note that Naruto didn't look too bad. Well, to be fair, that was mostly because she couldn't actually see any part of him. The blonde was decked out head to toe in bandages. Only his eyes, mouth, and some of his scalp were exposed. Okay, so he didn't look good but he still didn't look bad. Ino carefully forced the memory of the blonde's mangled body from her mind. He's alive. He'll be fine. He's alive. The pretty blonde mentally repeated that to herself as she walked. She glanced up to notice that she'd walked through half the hospital without realizing it. Where the hell is Sakura? Ino complained out loud as she stopped at a crossway in the hall, looking left and right for the pink-haired Chunin. What do you want, Ino pig? A feminine voice came from behind her. Ino's eyes took in Sakura as she turned around. Not much had changed about the girl in the last couple years. She still wore her hair short and had the same style of dress she had since the academy. The biggest change was that her rival carried herself with much greater confidence now. It irked Ino to no end that Sakura had grown so much under Tsunade's mentorship. Her own Junin instructor was as lazy as ever, spending more time hanging out and playing games with Shikamaru than he did training her and Choji. Sakura, on the other hand, had passed the first Chunin exam after Naruto left. Something she took great delight in reminding Ino. Ino hated to lose, but in recent times she found it was worse to be left behind. Most of the rookie 9+ team Guy had already made Chunin. Kiba, Lee, Naruto, and herself were the only ones who were still genin. Naruto at least had the excuse of being on a training trip the whole time and would likely dominate any exam he took in the future, assuming, of course, he recovered. Kiba demonstrated good skill, but he still had a blustery ego to overcome and that cost him every time. Lee was an odd case. The Hokage had refused to allow him into the exam immediately after his operation to make certain he was fully recovered. The boy was disappointed, but he merely used that as motivation for training. However, he got a nasty surprise in the next 2 exams when he was beaten by Genjutsu techniques each time. Lee's Taijutsu rivaled if not surpassed most Junin's abilities, but his weakness to ninjutsu and genjutsu held him back. And worse still, word had gotten out about around amongst the younger Leaf Nins about an incredibly powerful genin who could be dropped like a fly with well-placed genjutsu. Other genins taking the exams knew what to expect from Lee. He kept doggedly trying, but he had yet to devise a counter-strategy. Ino, on the other hand, she was weak. That was it. She lacked the skill and power to keep up with the others. Of the 12 members of their group, if Sasuke was still included, she was at the bottom end of the totem pole. She had one special skill and it had a terrible rate of success in active combat. Like Lee, word had spread about her and everyone that fought her knew to avoid her Shintenshin no Jutsu. She'd been soundly beaten by mediocre opponents in every exam she'd been in. It was really starting to piss her off, but there was little she could do without an instructor who took training seriously. Well, except try to make Sakura prematurely deaf in their arguments. Finally, "Forehead, I've been looking for you everywhere," Ino exclaimed as she walked up to her friend, rival. Sakura's face reddened in anger at the nickname. "Oh really? What do you want, pig?" the Chunin asked, one hand on her hip in annoyance. Ino snorted, "Just wanted to let you know your old teammate is here in the hospital." Sakura's face lit up in unexpected hope. You mean? Sasuke-kun? Where? What room is he in? What?" Ino yelled, startled by the mention of the traitor Uchiha. "She's still hung up on him?" "No, you pink-haired ditz. I mean Naruto. He's upstairs right now. Didn't Hokage-sama tell you?" "Oh," Sakura said, her face noticeably falling. "No, I didn't meet with her today." "Naruto's here?" "Yeah," Ino replied. They stood there for several moments in uncomfortable silence. "Well?" Ino finally prodded. "Aren't you going to go see him?" "Yeah, I'll see him in a while. It'll be nice to catch up," the Chunin replied, glancing down at some of the documents she was holding. She wasn't sure, but that sounded like a casual dismissal to Ino. She had the sudden urge to shake her friend, but she wasn't exactly sure why. "That's it? You'll see him later?" the genin demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. Sakura gave her a hard look, barely looking away from the forms. "Yeah, that's it. I'll see him on my rounds anyways." "What's your problem, pig?" the Chunin asked, annoyed with her friend's tone. Ino met her rival's hard look with one that could melt steel or make her teammates whimper in utter terror. "Nothing, really. I just thought you had, loyalty." "Guess I was wrong," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. Sakura stood up straighter, letting her papers hang by her side. "What crawled up your butt? I said I'll see him and I will. I have other duties I have to do." You know, Chunin duties, she smirked, making a deliberate dig at the difference in their rank. Don't give me that shit. Ino snarled, forcing down her rage at her rival's jab. A minute ago you were praying Sasuke was back. If it was him, you'd go running to his side in a second like some pathetic groupie. Funny how you're ignoring the friend who's done everything for you, when you jump to kiss the traitor's ass in a heartbeat. Nice place to put your loyalties, Sakura. Sakura's temper boiled. She was 3 seconds from decking Ino into the wall. What the hell did the pig know about it anyways? Why the hell would I go running to see the idiot for some stupid injury he probably did to himself? Maybe the moron finally pissed off someone better than him and they put the dead last in his place. The Chunin yelled. She wasn't really thinking about what she was saying and wouldn't have used those words to describe Naruto if she'd been thinking clearly. She did owe him her life after all. Ino's remarks had struck home though. Thinking clearly was the last thing she was doing. Ino's mind flashed to Naruto cheering on Sakura in the exams, hearing about his promise of a lifetime, and finally her conversation with Kakashi and how Naruto might have to give up his dream entirely. That memory was replaced by the one of the blonde's shredded body lying in the ceiling room. Dead last. A loud crack made both medics and patients alike look over at the two kunoichi. Sakura held a hand to her reddening cheek, as she stared in shock at her friend. Ino was slowly letting her hand drop back to her side. Despite the aura of near violence they'd been radiating, the blonde's slap had taken her completely by surprise. Sakura's mouth hung open as she watched Ino's face shift through a kaleidoscope of emotion. The genin seemed to be struggling to find something foul enough to say to the medic. Ungrateful bitch, Ino finally managed to spit out. Her sharp gray eyes looked downright vicious as she glared at Sakura. Without another word, she turned and stormed away. 2 full minutes passed before Sakura finally got her brain working again. She spent a split second pondering Ino's words before the rage hit. She dropped the documents that had been so important moments ago and ran through the halls and out the main lobby after her friend. She caught up to Ino about a block from the hospital, her friend's bright hair sticking out in the bright noon sunshine. She grabbed her rival's arm and swung her around, before slamming her into the wall of a nearby building. What the fuck was that? Do you want to fight, you blonde bimbo? You want a rematch? You want to see what I can do now? Huh, answer me, you stupid bitch. Sakura growled, her grip on Ino's dress tightening. The genin gave her look of icy loathing so venomous that it made Sakura flinch even in her anger. Her hold weakened enough that Ino was able to bring her hands up into the beginnings of her family jutsu. Sakura dropped her rival like she'd been electrocuted and flipped backwards a good 10 feet, dropping into a stance as she landed. Ino allowed her hands to fall to her sides as soon as Sakura let her go. Somehow, despite their difference in power and rank, Sakura got the distinct feeling she was being looked down on. I have no respect for someone who doesn't value their comrades, Ino said. Memories of Choji lying in a hospital bed, smiling at her despite his emaciated form, and of Shikamaru's bandaged hand briefly passed through her mind. She turned and kept walking away from her rival. You're not just a dumb little girl anymore, Sakura. You've lost sight of what's really important in life, assuming you ever had it. If I'd known how you'd turn out, I would never have spoken to you back then. That cut through every bit of Sakura's anger and left her with a cold, stinging sensation in her chest. For all their rivalry and arguments, Ino was the first person ever to befriend her. The blonde had given her confidence and companionship during the loneliest part of her life. She knew who was responsible for her growth. If Ino hadn't looked past the snot-nosed crybaby back then, Sakura would have never even made it to genin. That knowledge was a blow to her pride and that was the source of her jabs about their differing strength. But she couldn't deny that even though she was far stronger now, Ino was the one who built the foundation to that strength. The same part of her that treasured their friendship was forever grateful to the girl for acknowledging her back then. That Ino regretted her decision hurt her more than she'd ever allowed herself to believe possible. How like Ino to strip all her anger and pride away with a single cutting sentence. What are you talking about? Sakura grimaced at the tremor and shock in her voice. You heard me, Ino replied, stopping her walk but not turning around. But, why? Why are you so mad about all this? Sakura asked with a little desperation. Ino stayed silent for a long moment, before finally turning to face her friend. Her eyes held a tired coldness to them. You called him dead last, she said. But, I mean, I was Jew. You called him dead last, Ino repeated. Wasn't Sasuke the one who got the idea to call him that? Why the hell would you call him a nickname thought up by a traitor when he's your most loyal comrade? Sakura didn't say anything. That comment cut deep, but she couldn't make herself react to it. All she could do was stare wide-eyed at her friend. Dead last, Ino continued in an almost thoughtful tone. He saved both your life and Sasuke's, when neither of you thought he could fight his way through a yard of preschoolers. He proved that he's at least stronger than Neji, who was the #1 for his class. He caught the eye of a legendary Sannin and somehow managed to get the guy to train him. He even tried to bring Sasuke back for you. Ino crossed the distance between them and stopped a couple feet from the Chunin. Her eyes glittered like pieces of blue-gray crystal in the bright sunlight. He's been in love with you for years and he'd bring back someone totally unworthy of you, just because you asked him, she quietly said. I know all these things about him and I've spoken to him roughly 3 times since I met him at the academy. Hell, our whole crowd of friends knows this about him. You, his teammate and friend, should know that he's a better human being than Sasuke will ever be. He'd die for you, for his friends, to protect this village. Ino leaned her face in till her nose almost brushed Sakura's. And you call him dead last and say you'll visit later, when you feel like it, the blonde said in barely a whisper. Sakura flinched at that, guilt welling up despite her confusion at Ino's odd behavior. Hadn't Sasuke-kun himself admitted that Naruto saved them both from Gaara's full power? Hadn't Naruto sworn to bring Sasuke-kun back no matter what? Hadn't he promised her again that he'd keep trying, no matter how long it took, even as he lay in a hospital bed covered in bandages? She only noticed the faint, flowery scent of Ino's perfume when it faded. She looked up. Ino was already walking away again, having decided to let the medic stew in her thoughts. Some part of Sakura couldn't let the girl walk away. Wait, I don't get it. You don't even know him. Why are you so upset about this? This isn't like you at all, she yelled. Immediately after she said that, the thought occurred to her that maybe this was exactly like Ino. The girl had a history of finding things other people thought were worthless and staking a personal claim on them. Sakura herself was one of them. Was her rival doing the same thing to Naruto? The memory of Naruto's shredded flesh and the smell of his blood assaulted Ino's mind. The same smell from her dream. She felt her anger replaced by sudden nausea. She wanted a shower. Sakura, she said, not turning to face her rival. Go back to the hospital. Go to room 451. Look at the person, what's left of the person lying on the bed. Look at him long and hard and think about what you called him. Then remember that you were willing to brush him aside. Ino disappeared into the crowd of people walking around them without another word. Sakura was left with a sinking feeling of dread. What's left of him? Kakashi awoke from his peaceful doze when he felt a foreign chakra enter the room. With his chakra depleted, it was all he'd been able to do to resist finding an empty room and curling up in a bed for a day or two. The thought of what Ino would do to him if she found him like that had sent a shiver of terror up his spine. He had settled for using the reclining function of the chair next to Naruto's bed. Tsunade had been redirecting extra funds to the hospital since her inauguration and it really showed in the revamped hospital. Naruto's room was large enough for 3 beds. A large window ran parallel to his bed and there were a couple of these reclining chairs spread across the room. There was even a small couch underneath the window. Yes, Tsunade took her patients seriously, though most of this was probably for the comfort of anxious visitors. Kakashi shrugged of thoughts of the room's comfortable decor and focused his eye on the visitor. Amino Uruka stood in front of him, staring at the bandage-swathed form of his young friend. The Hokage must have thought to tell him the bad news. The scarred Chunin looked far older than his young years as he slowly crossed the room and set a small card on the table next to the bed. A small drawing of a bowl of ramen decorated the front of the gift. Looking down at the boy, he gently ruffled what little of the blonde's hair that was exposed. How bad is it? He asked, not taking his attention off Naruto. Kakashi sighed and slowly gave the Chunin the list of injuries Naruto had suffered. Through it all, the man's expression never changed. It was only the way his eyes twitched every time Kakashi described an injury that his thoughts were betrayed. Who did this? He asked when Kakashi trailed off. There was a boiling rage in the man's eyes that would have made the copy nin flinch had it been directed at him. I can't tell you, Kakashi replied. His voice sounded honestly remorseful, as opposed to their argument before the Chunin exam almost 2 years ago. Can't or won't, Junin? Iruka coldly replied. Can't, Chunin, and wouldn't even if I could, Kakashi answered evenly, giving the Chunin a firm stare. Hokage-sama ordered this to be kept quiet, and even if she hadn't, you wouldn't want to go hunting these people. I think Naruto would want you here with him when he wakes up and not lying dead in the woods somewhere. Iruka's anger had been growing until the copy nin mentioned Naruto. That popped his rising fury like a balloon. No, he wouldn't go and get himself killed over this. Naruto would rip him a new one if he died. Though, mentioning the Hokage made his mind click to something else. His injuries. The Hokage wasn't able to do anything? The dark-haired man asked. No, Kakashi replied, shaking his head. His visible eye was rather mournful. Even she was hard-pressed just to save his life. We're hoping his tenant may be able to repair him in the long term, but Godem-sama said that it'll be a long time before it can even get started. His inner coils are really messed up right now. A Hyuga would be hard-pressed to do worse. His ten. Ah, I see, Iruka said. The fox. So, it can do something for him? Naruto's healing is normally off the scale. Just one of the abilities he gets from his tenant, the copy nin informed. He wasn't surprised Iruka knew nothing about what the Kyuubi's powers did for Naruto. It was likely an uncomfortable subject for both ninjas. Naruto's injuries are a result of certain individuals tampering with the seal. His guest can't control chakra in Naruto's body, so the healing factor is severely limited. Hokage-sama is still hopeful though. It's doubtful the resident will allow its only line of defense to weaken unless it has no choice. Iruka nodded, his eyes downcast. That blasted demon was the very definition of mixed blessing. A long silence stretched out between them, with Kakashi allowing his mind to wander and the teacher staring at his former student. After a few minutes, the Chunin gave Naruto one last hair ruffle and walked to the door. The copy nin watched his movements with surprise. You're leaving? Kakashi asked, a slight note of surprise in his voice. Iruka glared at him. Not by choice, the Chunin said with gritted teeth. Why did it always feel like the great copy ninja Kakashi was looking down on him in some way? I have a mission out in Wind Country that I have to leave for in 20 minutes. Unlike you, my name doesn't carry much weight with the Hokage and I still have to go on it, though she was kind enough to delay the mission by an hour so I could visit Naruto. Kakashi held his hands up in a placating manner. Easy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I just thought you'd have to be dragged kicking and screaming away from him, the tall man said. Some of Iruka's anger deflated, but there were still a few embers burning. Like I said, I don't have any choice. I shouldn't even be doing it, but there's no Junin available, he grumbled. Really? What rank is it? Kakashi asked, his curiosity growing. A rank. I'm going with a team to assassinate a missing nin who's been making trouble. The sand's almost as hard up for ninjas as we are and the case cage asked this as a personal favor of Godem-sama. Seems like this guy's running amok in outlying wind villages killing civilians and such, Iruka replied. The mission wasn't classified, so it wasn't like he couldn't tell Kakashi. You have backup? The copy nin asked, a slight note of concern in his voice. It wasn't that he doubted Iruka's abilities, but taking on an A-rank criminal by himself was just foolhardy. The schoolteacher made a half grin. 2 Junins and a hunter nin. They're the ones that wanted an extra man in case something went wrong. This guy's supposed to have some bizarre and powerful bloodline, but we should be able to handle it. There was a hint of pride in Iruka's voice. It wasn't often he went on a ranks and he usually looked forward to them, although this one couldn't have come at a worse time. The Hokage had mentioned that of the Chunin available, the Anbu had specifically asked for him. It wasn't in him to disappoint someone's confidence in his abilities, but he was a little curious about why they picked a schoolteacher of all people. Be careful, regardless. Bloodline limits are unpredictable and who knows what other tricks he may have, Kakashi said seriously, a lifetime of experience reinforcing his words. I'd offer to take over for you, but What? Iruka asked. It'd almost be worth the humiliation of Kakashi replacing him if it meant he'd be able to watch over Naruto. I sorta can't move, Kakashi replied with a near-visible heart popping up by his head. Iruka nearly face-vaulted at the Junin's sunny expression. What have you done to yourself now? The Chunin asked sarcastically. Kakashi's cheerful eye smile didn't even twitch at the tone. I burned all my chakra using the Sharingan and a jutsu I haven't mastered, the Junin replied. Iruka had the urge to whack the copy nin over the head like one of his students. What the hell's wrong with you? You're a Junin for Kami's sake. You're supposed to know your limits. Moron, Iruka roared, his teacher mentality coming to bear. Kakashi stared at him for a moment, before snapping his fingers. You were Ino-san's teacher, weren't you? The copy nin replied. Yeah, how could you tell? Iruka replied blankly. Kakashi's sweat dropped. Never mind. Iruka got a downright evil look on his face. Oh ho, so Ino's been here? And you can't move, huh? The great copycat Kakashi is totally helpless while Yamanaka Ino is hanging around. Kakashi felt a shiver of fear at the man's wicked expression. Why, oh why, did he taunt the Chunin during the pre-exams 2 years ago? I think I'll be going now, got that mission and all. I'll see you later, maybe you'll even be alive. With that, Iruka walked out the door. His cheerful whistling was a stark contrast to the psychotic grin on his face. Kakashi was left to wonder why a man was so happy to face an A-rank missing-nin instead of being defenseless near Ino. He promptly shut that thought out of his mind, an image of the blonde girl's rage-filled face thoroughly reminding him of why he had never gotten married. Well, it's not like a thin girl like her could do much to a high-level Junin like himself, right? Right. He still made sure his favorite copy of Icha Icha was well hidden in his side pouch before going back to sleep. Ino grumbled something rather foul and shifted the weight in her arms. When she'd gotten home, her parents were waiting and they'd gotten into a long argument. They were understandably pissed off that she had disappeared without opening the shop and had left the door open all while a gigantic toad was running around the city. Wanting to hurry back to the hospital, she'd done the typical teenager routine and stormed into her room while yelling at the top of her considerable lungs. They'd left her alone long enough for her to take a shower, swipe some flowers, and sneak back out. She really didn't want run into Sakura again today, but if she wanted Naruto to have some flowers in his room, she'd have to risk it. The idiot had better appreciate it. Stupid parents. Stupid Sakura. Stupid, evil assassins who pick on hyper-blonde fuzzballs, Ino muttered, running a little low on things to complain about. Stupid long walk to the hospital. Hello, Ino-san, a cheerful voice called, breaking through her dark thoughts. Oh, hello Lee-san, Ino politely said as she looked up. The boy dodged his way through the crowd towards her, smiling quite happily. The Rookie 9 and Guys team got along pretty well with each other and they would often stop and chat if they saw each other in the street. Well, not really chat in Neji and Shino's case, but even they would at least nod a greeting as they passed by. How are you today, Ino-san? The taijutsu specialist asked. Rock Lee had gotten noticeably taller in the last couple years and his face had grown sharper. His green jumpsuit and haircut remained, sadly, the same. He smiled cheerfully, though he looked a little out of breath. Ino's eyes traced to his feet, where the solid packed dirt of the street was noticeably depressed underneath him. He must have upped his weights again. I'm okay Lee-san, though I'm feeling kind of tired. Did you boost your training again? She asked. Ino might be the queen bitch to people who pissed her off, i.e. Sakura, Shikamaru, Choji, Asuma-sensei, that idiot Kiba. Her parents, that one Chunin who looked at her funny last week. Well, you get the idea, but she didn't find Lee too annoying. He was a little odd and downright creepy in his obsession with all things guy-related, but he worked his ass off to compensate for his weakness and was genuinely friendly to people, which was good in her book. Yosh, I added another 30 pounds to each leg this morning and promised to do 5,000 push-ups if I can't run around the village 70 times. Lee declared, with his bandaged fist clenched in the air and fire blazing in his eyes. Okay, so he's really odd, and he needs to take some Valium. But he's still a good guy, Ino thought as she watched the genin hoot and cheer himself on while he jogged, hopped, danced in circles around her. Lee-san, calm down, she yelled as she grabbed the boy's shoulder with her free hand on his next circuit. He cringed for a moment, before relaxing and smiling sheepishly when he realized his fellow genin wasn't going to wallop him. No, Ino was saving that for Guy. Some crimes couldn't go unanswered for. I'm glad you're happy training, but you don't need to make a spectacle out of it, the blonde said with a friendly smirk. Maybe you're right, Ino-san, Lee replied, though it was obvious he didn't particularly care how big a fool he made of himself. Those are some interesting flowers you have there. Are you making a delivery? Ino looked at the strange bouquet in her arms. Ah, that's right. No, not really. I'm taking them to a friend in the hospital, she said with a shrug. Really? Who? Lee asked curiously. Oh, just Uzumaki Naruto. Hitaki Kakashi had exactly 0.3 seconds to sense an incoming chakra before the most terrible wailing imaginable awoke him from a sound slumber. He raised his forehead protector from his normal eye and took in the sight of Guy's student Rock Lee blubbering incoherently over Naruto's comatose body while Ino stood in the doorway watching in semi-stunned bemusement. The girl looked like she'd been dragged halfway to the hospital by a lunatic. Kakashi's eye drifted back to Lee and made the logical connection. Guy, if you don't want to have children I respect that, but that doesn't give you the right to run around Konoha mutating innocent children into evil clones of yourself. Ino tried to straighten her messy hair out while glaring at the hysterical boy. She gave up when she realized Lee wouldn't notice her even if she was waving around a neon sign that said, Kakashi rules. Guy drools, while screaming at the top of her lungs. The genin sighed and walked towards Kakashi's side of the room. The copy nin watched curiously as she lugged a large object up and set it on the side table while ignoring the wails echoing in the room. Kakashi stared at the vase and its contents before letting out a choked-off laugh. Ino-san, that's an interesting selection you made, the Junin said, his eye nearly watering with the effort to restrain his laughter. What can I say? A unique present for a unique personality and fashion sense, Ino replied with a smug look on her face. Think he'll like it? Like it? He may ask you to marry him, Kakashi replied, while reaching over to straighten a flower that had come loose. Ino's present was a large vase. It was also a heavy vase, as she'd made the mistake of filling it with water before she left her house. It wasn't the vase though that was the source of the Junin's mirth and the stares she'd received walking to the hospital. Though Lee could take part of that credit considering he had half-carried her in his mad run to see Naruto. Orange. Ino had filled the vase with flowers the same gaudy, tacky orange that Naruto loved so much. She had every kind of flower imaginable in the vase with their only similarity being their color. She had wisely, and correctly, guessed that Naruto didn't know a thing about delicate flower arrangements, so she'd just thrown something of everything in. Ino figured he'd only see the color and the thought behind it, so it wasn't like she'd have to waste time carefully choosing and arranging the bouquet like she would with a customer. The only thing that Ino had put in it that wasn't orange was a single, medium-sized sunflower which rested at the top of the bunch. The whole thing was a terrible eyesore, with the magnolias, daises, and lilies all clashing with each other and the cheery sunflower. Nobody sane would be caught dead even looking at it. Obviously Naruto would love it beyond words. He might, but I'm not sure I could marry someone with such an awful taste in clothes, Ino replied, swatting Kakashi's hand away from the vase as she did some last-minute arrangements. She turned to take a look at Naruto and saw Lee still crying into the boy's bandaged chest. Sweat drops appeared on both Genin and Junin's heads. Lee-san, Lee-san, Lee, Ino yelled trying to get his attention. She glanced at Kakashi. The tall man shrugged. I've been dealing with Guy for years. This really isn't that bad, the copy nin replied. Ino grumbled something and walked over to the boy to drag him off their fellow genin. Unfortunately, Lee was a hell of a lot stronger than her and his jumpsuit made it hard to get a grip on him. She finally put him in a full Nelson from behind, all the while listening to his wailing. Don't worry Naruto, youth power will save you. Your fires of youth shall never be vanquished. Your springtime shall never wane. Damn it Lee, get off him before you make his injuries worse. Ino had just managed to pull Lee a few feet from the bed, as Kakashi watched with visible amusement, when a booming voice interrupted them. Eternal rival, how can you sit by idly when your wonderful student has been cut low in the prime of his youth? Lee spun like a top towards the newcomer, accidentally throwing Ino across the room. Oh Guy-sensei. Oh Lee. Oh God. Kakashi muttered as he pulled his forehead protector down over his exposed eye again. He would avoid watching the beautiful beast's hug if it killed him. Besides, if he leaned back and acted like he was asleep, maybe they'd leave him alone. Sensei and student were too busy embracing to a sunset background to notice the Junin. Ino wobbly got to her feet and stared at the spectacle in front of her. Was that some sort of genjutsu behind them? Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. If you say that one more time, the Anbu will never find your bodies, Ino growled, the malevolent fire in her eyes not related to youth power in any way. The sunset background shattered with the sound of a record being scratched. Lee and Guy separated and coughed nervously, while avoiding eye contact with the sharp-tongued blonde in front of them. I wish I could copy that, Kakashi commented as he raised his protector long enough to look at the rare phenomenon of Guy being quiet. Ino only humphed and crossed her arms. So he's really that bad, huh? Lee quietly said. Ino nodded, briefly glancing over to where Kakashi was involved in a low-voiced conversation with Guy. Both genins were sitting on the couch, occasionally looking at the subject of their conversation. It seems like he won't be able to fight or do anything again. Not even the Hokage can heal him, she replied sadly. Oh, Lee muttered, his head downcast. He felt for Naruto, he really did. The cold despair he'd experienced when Tsunade-sama had told him he'd have to give up being a shinobi wasn't something he'd wish on anyone, let alone the hyper-blonde who'd cheered for him. Well, if Naruto believed in him when his future was uncertain, then he'd do the same in return. Besides, he'd never known anyone who could get up after being beaten down so often like the fuzzy-haired genin. It was just a matter of time. Ino didn't look too convinced when he voiced his opinion to her. Yeah, but he doesn't have any muscles left. Even if he does get better, he's set back years. You think he can really recover from that? She asked skeptically. Of course. You should have seen him after his fight with Sasuke. He bounced back from that and he'll bounce back from this. He's at least as tough as me and I made a full recovery, so don't worry too much about it, Ino-san. Lee replied, giving a more subdued version of his nice guy pose. Ino smiled without any sarcasm at the boy. Maybe she'd take back most of the nasty mental comments she'd made about him earlier. Of course, then he had to go and ruin the mood. And if Naruto doesn't make a full recovery, then I'll do 10,000 push-ups while standing on my hands. 5 for me and an extra 5 for him, Lee declared. Yosh. And if Lee can't do 10,000 handstand push-ups, then I'll run to the hidden sand and back in 2 days. Guy said, jumping to his feet. A large sweat drop appeared at the side of Kakashi's head as he tried to convince himself that he didn't know this man. And if Guy-sensei can't make the run in time, I'll carve Naruto's face on the Hokage monument. Lee yelled, also jumping to his feet and clenching his fist in triumph. Ino covered her face with her hands. And if Lee is arrested by the Anbu before he can finish, I'll break him out of jail with a boulder tied to my back. Guy announced. Guy-sensei. Lee, Kami-sama, Ino muttered. Ino stretched out on the couch in Naruto's hospital room, idly reading a scroll she had picked up from her house earlier. It wasn't very late in the day, still only around 3 or 4, so she didn't feel like going home yet. Guy had mentioned that Tsunade would drop by again early in the evening to do a checkup and Ino wanted to be present and ask the legendary medic some questions. She glanced up at the clock, then to Naruto's still form, and over to Kakashi silently snoozing in his chair. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the light beeping of the heart monitor. Ah, Ino thought, savoring the absence of the bowl cuts. Lee had wanted to stay, but Kakashi had suggested that he go and alert the rest of their circle to Naruto's present condition. The boy had taken that as a personal quest and rushed from the room in search of the assorted genin and chunin. Some of them were probably on missions right now, so it would be a while before he returned. Guy also had a mission, that he'd held up because he'd taken off when he heard the news, and he'd vacated soon after his prize student left. In the blessed silence that followed their absence, Kakashi had dozed off again. He did wake up long enough to thank Ino when she scrounged up another crutch for him, but he was out again before she even sat back down on the couch. Chakra depletion is nothing to laugh at, the blonde thought. She really didn't know, having never totally burned herself out of chakra. Then again, she was usually cautious about it since she lacked the large reserves that people like Naruto seemed to have in spades. Well, who knew what long-term damage had been done to him? Anyways, after seeing Kakashi's exhaustion and the effects it had on him, Ino had been curious enough to dig up a couple of her old scrolls from her academy days. She had done well on the exams, but some of the basic knowledge had slipped over the years as an active genin. She figured refreshing her memory might help her find her niche. Her near fight earlier with her rival had rubbed at least one point in. She was weaker than everyone else and it was about damn time she did something about Ino envied Sakura and the other Chunins not only for their superior strength and rank, but also because each of them seemed to have something that felt right. Each had a certain style or a combination of abilities and knowledge that fit them perfectly. Sakura had her medical skills and a good talent in Genjutsu. Neji had the Byakugan and all the Hyuga techniques. Hinata also bore the Hyuga bloodline and had medical talent as well. Tenten had her weapons. That Shinogai could do all sorts of things with his bugs. Hell, her own teammate Shikamaru had his family's jutsu and his powerful mind. And her other teammate Choji had all of his family skills to work with. Even among those still genin, everyone had something that they did well and suited them. Kiba had his dual style of fighting with his dog. Lee knew more advanced Tai Jutsu than I, not often Junins, and even the traitor Sasuke had the Sharingan. The only person who didn't have a specialization besides Ino was Naruto. He didn't excel in Tai Jutsu or Genjutsu, nor did he know many ninjutsu, though what ninjutsu he did know were very powerful. Then again, that also seemed to suit him. Naruto held no specialization, so he played the wild card role very well. His main skill, the Kage Bunshin, granted him incredible adaptability and let him go anywhere he needed to in a fight. He had his niche. Ino still didn't have hers. Looking over her scroll and the generalized paths to take as a shinobi, Ino still couldn't find something to suit her. Her family's jutsu was only useful in conjunction with the Nara and Akamichi techniques. Not only did that limit her in a one-on-one fight or a solo mission, but she had never worked well with Shikamaru and Choji to begin with. Even those two, despite being best friends, didn't work seamlessly together. Part of the problem was that their team had been forced together by their parents, who had all been on the same team in their genin days. Though the Ino-Shika-Cho formation had worked exceptionally for them, it hadn't served their children very well. So her family's skill was a bust. Well, the Shintention was out, though there might be more that she'd yet to learn. Her father had an incredibly powerful jutsu that let him take over enemy mines from a distance, but he had yet to teach it to her, much to her annoyance. Whenever she asked, he always made up some excuse and changed the topic. Still, there might be more that even he didn't know. Ino had a strange feeling there was far more to her family than just a couple abilities, but her father had never mentioned it, nor had he demonstrated any other mental skill. Part of her curiosity was the strange, foreboding dreams she had occasionally. Though she hadn't realized it at the time, the reason she had run to the hospital earlier this morning was the dream she'd had the night before. Both the wobbly feeling and the smell of blood had actually happened to her. Perhaps it was foresight of some sort. Or maybe not. She could have been seeing the events as they were happening. Naruto would have been attacked sometime while she was asleep after all. What if she could develop her family skill into a full-blown bloodline limit? But what could Ino use it with? It's all well and good to be able to brag you have a bloodline, but unless you had other skills to back it up, the limit would be useless. The Byakugan was just a built-in telescope without the Hyuga fighting style to back it. Hell, even the Sharingan couldn't actually teach you how to fight, no matter how many skills you copied. So what could she merge with a potential psychic ability? Well, using the limit with ninjutsu wouldn't really be helpful unless you were countering your opponent. Tai Jutsu. Well, on the surface it didn't seem like it would mesh well, but if you could somehow read your opponent's mind and anticipate their next move, you could dominate an enemy, even if they were stronger than you. Although Tai Jutsu wasn't much good if your body lacked the talent for it. Ino ruefully looked at her thin arms and legs. What good was sensing your opponent's next move if you couldn't move fast enough to dodge it? Even if she was psychic, it wouldn't do a thing against someone like Lee. That left either ninja tools or genjutsu. Ino was uncomfortable relying too heavily on a weapon or a tool of some sort. Kiba was an example of over-depending on a tool. He relied on the soldier pills to pull off his best maneuvers with Akamaru, and that hadn't gotten him far against Naruto or that sound nin he fought on the Sasuke recapture mission. So that left genjutsu. Ino stared long and hard at the kanji for gen on the scroll in front of her. Perhaps genjutsu was often overlooked by younger shinobi, but in the right hands it was deadly even to experienced junins. Granted, that was usually only if someone was caught by the illusion. A psychic ability might be able to entrap an opponent with ease and make the illusion itself far more intense. It would also be a total bitch to break out of. Yes, that felt right. Ino stood and quietly walked to the cabinets on the far side of the room. It took a little while, but she managed to find a thin brush and an inkwell to use. The genin glanced at Kakashi, who apparently slept with both eyes covered. The Junin hadn't even flinched when past him. He slept like most ninja, deeply and quickly, but able to rouse themselves at a moment's notice when a threat was detected. Her movements wouldn't disturb him unless she was standing above him with a scalpel or something. Watching the dozing copy nin, Ino's resolve only increased. Remaining aware of the surrounding environment while sleeping was a little thing to a ninja of Kakashi's caliber, but it was something Ino had yet to even brush. Even if he did have over a decade more experience than her, it was still a reminder that she wasn't at the level she wanted or needed to be at. Ino sat on the couch with her legs stretched out in front of her. She carefully propped the inkwell on the armrest next to her and spread the scroll out on her lap. She found a large blank space after the genjutsu section and dunked the brush in the ink. Carefully, she drew out a pentagon and added 5 lines that ran from each point to the center. She leaned back and blew on the ink to dry it. It wasn't perfect, but it was a reasonable rendition of the cards that gray-haired guy with the glasses had shown them at their first Chunin exam. She frowned slightly. Come to think of it, she hadn't seen him at any of the other exams, even though she knew he had failed again. Ino shrugged, brushing the thought off. It wasn't her business if Four Eyes quit being a ninja, she hadn't even bothered to learn his name. Like Four Eyes cards, she put a careful kanji mark outside each point. Nin, Gen, Tai, Tool, and Blood. First of course was the genjutsu specialty she wanted to develop. She shaded the gen point all the way. Even if she never became a genjutsu master, it was good to have a high goal to work towards. Naruto wanted to be Hokage, but even if he never did he could still end up as high as Anbu Commander or something, though she doubted Naruto would ever settle and he'd likely make life a complete and utter hell for whoever got the Hokage title over him. Even if she never pulled it off, it would be good to at least train like she intended to be a master. Ino skipped over tools entirely, and marked about a quarter of the way up on Tai and halfway up on Nin. As far as she knew, even the best genjutsu couldn't totally defeat an opponent, so she would need to have other skills to rely on. She'd never be able to compare even to the other genins of their group in those fields, but they were necessary skills to have if she wanted to survive in the shinobi world. Eyeing the diagram, her attention fell to the point marked, Blood. Ino sighed and drew a small question mark there. Of course, all of this assumed that she even had a bloodline limit to awaken. Even if she did, the odds weren't exactly in her favor that it would be what she wanted. Her weird dreams could be just that, weird dreams. They seemed real enough, but did she know for sure? They could just be a side effect of the Shintention, like she'd originally thought. And of course, if she did have a bloodline limit and it was a useful psychic ability, she didn't know any way of awakening it. It was unlikely that she'd just be walking along one day and have blazed to life in her head. Ino set the brush and inkwell on the floor and leaned back further on the couch. What on earth could she do to awaken a bloodline? If she was honest with herself, any limit would be welcome, even if it wasn't one she expected. Who could she ask? The Nara and Akamichi clans had family styles of fighting, but they weren't bloodlines, so she couldn't ask Shikamaru and Choji's dads for help. Her own father was the same scenario and she wasn't really close enough to him anyways. The Aburame clan had a bloodline, but it was more like a permanent summoning contract than a limit. The Hyuga clan was a good choice, except none of the members had to actually awaken the Byakugan. They all had it, at least to a certain degree. Now the Uchiha clan might have been helpful as the Sharingan needed to be activated. She knew that much from her Sasuke fangirl days. Except the whole lot of them were either dead or traitors. But, speaking of the Sharingan, Ino looked up at the snoozing Kakashi. She weighed the pros and cons of bothering him about this. Despite his lazy attitude, the copy nin was a busy man normally. Their shared concern over Naruto was the only real connection they had to each other. Ino already had a sensei, even if he sucked at teaching, and Kakashi had other things to attend to. It really wasn't her place to impose on the man. Although, as long as he was down with chakra depletion, he probably wouldn't mind answering a few questions about bloodlines. Maybe she could even weasel out how he got the Sharingan without being an Uchiha. Well, she'd save that for after he answered her questions, in case it was a sensitive subject, which it probably was considering he'd never told anyone about it. For now the genin would let him sleep though. The man was exhausted after all and it would be pretty rude of her to wake him up. Read. She didn't want to piss him off and never get her questions answered. Nah, she'd bug Kakashi about it later. Setting her scroll to one side, Ino stood and stretched her back. Looking around the spacey room, the genin idly noted that Tsunade was doing something nice with Konoha's medical program. The room was large, at least 20 by 15 feet, and was well stocked with the usual set of counters, cupboards, sink, and large bathroom, for a hospital anyways. A large window ran the length of Naruto's bed and he would have great view of the trees outside whenever he got around to waking up. Naruto's actual bed was one of those fancy mechanical things that could raise, lower, and change shape with the push of a button. It was currently in a slightly raised position, so the boy looked like he was reclining. There was the couch she'd been sitting on, which she discovered was actually a small fold-out bed when she dropped her scroll in between the cushions earlier, and also several lightweight, reclining chairs that looked cheap, but seemed to be pretty comfortable. Kakashi's steady slumber implied a moderate level of comfort, at least. There were even a few tasteful modern lamps scattered about that could be used instead of the harsher fluorescent lights. All in all, pretty nice for an IC room. Although, she had yet to see a single nurse come in. Didn't someone so heavily injured need to have constant supervision? The boy had nearly died about 12 hours ago. If she was on the nursing staff, she'd be pretty damn worried about his status. A frown marred her pretty features as Ino walked to the side of Naruto's bed closest to the window. Damn, what little she could see of his face was white as his hospital sheet. The boy was pale and sweaty, as though suffering a fever. Naruto's face twitched slightly, a faint grimace of pain apparent even through his bandages. Without realizing what she was doing, Ino reached out and brushed at the tufts of hair that stuck out from the gauze strips. The texture surprised her as her fingers ran through the blonde mess. Fuzzball indeed. The golden blonde strands felt fuzzy and soft, yet had a subtle coarseness to them. It was oddly familiar, yet weird, like it shouldn't be on a human. What the heck did it remind her of? A memory came to her, one of a young cat that she'd brought home once. The kitten's fur had been soft and coarse at the same time, similar to Naruto's, though his felt far less downy. Fur, Naruto's hair felt like soft animal fur. How strange. The genin gently rubbed a tuft between her thumb and forefinger, liking the feel of it. Though, it did annoy her that a boy had better hair than hers naturally, when she used half a dozen products on her own lemon blonde locks at home. It suddenly occurred to Ino that she was standing over a near stranger's bed playing with his hair and anyone could walk in the door. Or worse, Kakashi could wake up. Ino withdrew her hand with a sigh. Not really wanting to sit back down, the genin settled for leaning against the plastic rail on the side of the bed. What the hell was she doing? Why was she even here? I don't even know you. The genin thought, staring at the unconscious boy's face. Why the hell do I even care? I made a fool of myself running around today, fought with my parents and my best friend, and had to deal with the creepy bowl cut squad all because you decided to come back to town. The dream had spurred Ino into chasing after Naruto the first time. She'd waited 3 hours because she had to know if he'd live after seeing how terrible his injuries were. She could have left after leaving Kakashi here as his former sensei, current guard, but why didn't she? Why did she get him flowers that she knew he would love? Why did she even come back at all? Dead last. Damn, that might be it. Sakura had managed to set that part of Ino's personality off. It burned like hell to see the medic brush off a teammate like he was a mere acquaintance rather than a comrade that had always stood by her. Ino had her problems with Shikamaru and Choji, but one thing they always did was stick with each other. They might not work well together and they might argue all the time, but they always cared about each other. Even when she thought Shikamaru was a useless bum and Choji a fat idiot, she never turned her back on them if they were in trouble. To see Sakura act like that, well, it made her furious to see her dismiss a comrade. It just wasn't right to blow off someone who'd saved your life. Sakura would have run people over in her rush to see Sasuke, even after all the shit he put the rookie 9 through. And people thought Ino was the shallow one. The genin sighed out loud, relaxing her suddenly clenched hands. Sakura. Perhaps Sakura herself was part of this little riddle. All her life Ino found things other people ignored or dismissed as useless, cleaned them up, and showed them off. Maybe it was a rebellion from being her parents' little girl, or maybe she just liked showing people up. Whatever the reason, every now and then she'd bring home another piece of junk, as her mother called it, and spend weeks fiddling with it. Broken toys, ripped up old scrolls, rusty kunai, stray cats and dogs, though her parents always took those to the Inuzuka vet office, pound after she brought them home. You name it, she found it and fixed it. Strangely, almost everything that caught her eye turned out to be a diamond in the rough. One dog she brought home turned out to be a rare pedigree after she'd given it a bath. Kiba's mother had even paid her a decent fee for the animal when her parents made her give it up. A scroll she cleaned and patched up turned out to have part of a forgotten taijutsu style on it. It wasn't useful to her, but she'd shown it to Haruka-sensei and he'd been delighted. He had taken her to show it to the sandaime himself, and the kind old man had been so impressed with the repair job that he asked her to seriously consider restoration as a side job in the future. The only part of her hobby that she disliked was that almost everything she'd ever fixed up wound up with someone else, either through her parents or because someone else would make better use of it. She wasn't allowed to keep the stray animals. The kunai and scrolls went to other ninja, and the other odds and ends were usually given to her friends. She had finally tried to break the cycle when she met Sakura. Sakura? She'd been Ino's gamble. Just once she had wanted something for herself. The skills she learned at school and from her parents were nice, but they were given to her. Birthday presents, odd gifts, love letters and valentines. Just stuff was just handed to her. Ino had kept looking for something she could play a part in making and keep that for herself. She had hoped it would be Sakura. When Ino first laid eyes on her, she didn't see tears, dirt, and snot. She saw beautiful pale skin, bright green eyes, and sugary pink hair that she half expected to smell like cotton candy or bubblegum. Sakura was the prettiest flower Ino had ever seen in her life, even when the girl was bawling her eyes out. So Ino had given her a ribbon and became her friend, while spending most of her academy days building the girl's confidence. She wanted Sakura to become even more beautiful, and she'd figured getting the girl to believe in herself and become a strong kunoichi would help. Part of her was jubilant that she'd cleaned off Sakura's crusty exterior and revealed just how beautiful she really was for the world to see. Part of Ino wanted to keep the pale girl locked up forever, so nobody would ever steal her away. And another part of her was just happy to have someone close to her. Then Ino got a crush on Sasuke and warbled on about him to his other fangirls, forgetting that she had someone far more beautiful already. Then Sakura got a crush on Sasuke too. That made Ino nervous, but she didn't really think much of it because at the time she figured only an idiot wouldn't like Sasuke. And then came one of the most painful days in her life. Sakura gave back the ribbon and walked away. Ino hadn't stopped her. It was Sakura's choice after all. Even though it hurt like hell, Ino didn't fight it. Sakura was just one more thing that would never belong to her. The pain from that day still burned her though. Their early rivalry had sprung from Ino's resentment and Sakura's urge to prove herself to Sasuke. The blonde girl had accepted over time that not only was Sakura not hers, but she was never going to be. Unfortunately, Ino's feelings hadn't gone away over the years. They had merely changed from a child's admiration to a teenager's desire. It didn't help that Sakura's beauty grew almost daily. In the end though, it didn't really matter. Sakura had walked away from her and she seriously doubted the girl would suddenly drop to her knees in front of her and declare her undying love. And if Ino was honest with herself, she could admit that it was probably for the best. Sakura could be a real bitch sometimes, and having two in the same relationship was just asking for trouble. Ino had stopped her hobby after Sakura, not wanting to go through that pain ever again. But when Sakura had called Naruto dead last and dismissed him like nothing, Ino had felt the old urge come back. She could see how the boy would set it off. The fuzz ball fit her mold almost perfectly. Naruto was the poster boy for diamond in the rough. On the surface he was a near worthless idiot, who made stupid boasts and dumb mistakes. He was rude, ignorant, and had a fashion sense that could make a clothing designer commit suicide. But that was just the surface. Underneath was a ninja who was insanely dedicated, had raw potential out the ass, and cared a lot about other people. The last part sounded corny, but it was true. Ino hadn't lied when she said Naruto would die for his friends. The boy wouldn't even hesitate. Ino barely knew him, but the hyper genin just seemed like the person to fight for other people and not budge an inch. Underneath his idiotic exterior, Naruto was the embodiment of every major trait a Hokage should have. More than that, he was a good person and would grow into a good man. Very, very few people saw that. Naruto fit the profile for every single thing that Ino had ever claimed before. It was perfect. Except for one detail. Naruto didn't need Ino. Everything else that she had ever fixed up, Sakura especially, would have withered away without her. Each trinket, animal, and person had needed Ino, even if only for a little while. Naruto didn't. The Hyper Boy was growing just fine without her. Hell, he grew just fine without anyone. He grew better with other people and he treasured them above everything else, but in the end he'd survive and flourish by himself. He was like a tree seedling slowly forcing its way up through pavement. Ino didn't want to interfere with that. She couldn't clean off Naruto's exterior like she had with Sakura. There was nothing about him that she could improve that wouldn't change naturally with age and experience. Something about him still called to her, though. He didn't need her, but if she were brutally honest then maybe that's what she needed. Someone who could be an equal. Neither given to her nor made by her, but still near her. Not necessarily as a boyfriend or a comrade, though she wasn't really adverse to either possibility, but just someone to be around. A friend. Was that why she was here? Did she want that? Did Naruto offer something Shikamaru, Choji, and Sakura didn't? Ino honestly didn't know. She did want to find out though. Perhaps that was why. Naruto was a possibility, of what she wasn't sure. Maybe she wanted to change this part of her life as much as she wanted to change her fighting style. Maybe she wanted to take another gamble. For all she knew, Naruto could wake up the next day, thank her for the flowers, and forget all about her. But maybe he wouldn't. Ino still didn't know much about him, but one thing she did know for certain was that Naruto had a way of surprising the hell out of people. She doubted she'd be an exception. Ino shook her head out of her daze. Glancing up at the clock, she was surprised to note that she had been standing beside the boy for almost 40 minutes. It was getting late and she was getting hungry. Not to mention the Hokage would be here soon and she'd better wake Kakashi up. The genin walked around the bed and towards the still sleeping copy nin. Not surprisingly, the Junin moved almost the instant Ino touched his shoulder. Kakashi lazily stretched for a long moment, before sliding his forehead protector up from his right eye. "Ah, Ino-san, what's the problem?" he drawled out in a relaxed voice. "Nothing. I just thought you might want to be awake when the Hokage shows up," Ino replied, standing up straight. The Junin nodded. "Yes, I would. Thanks, you probably saved me from getting my head pounded," Kakashi said with a cheerful, upturned eye. Ino snorted at the sight and walked over towards the bathroom door. "You better not fall asleep again," she growled. Hi, the copy nin replied, looking around the room to find something to do while he waited for Tsunade to show up. Ino shrugged and closed the door to take care of business. She closed it moments before Kakashi's eye fell on the opened scroll on the couch. A few minutes later, Ino stepped out of the bathroom while still drying her hands with a paper towel. She nearly dropped it in surprise when she saw the copy ninja calmly reading through her scroll in his chair. The genin's lip curled in annoyance. Stupid, curious Junins. "Hey, you mind not reading that? That happens to be mine, you know," she snapped, tossing her crumpled paper towel in the garbage can. You say something, Ino-san?" Kakashi replied as he glanced up at her. Ino's vision turned red and she cracked her knuckles. She was 2 seconds from demonstrating just what happened to rude ninjas who snooped through her things, when the door opened. "Be sure to keep the wall patrols alert," Tsunade was saying to an Anbu behind her. The Anbu replied something inaudible, to which the Hokage nodded, before the ninja walked away. The Godem opened the door further and walked in with Shizune. She glanced at Kakashi and Ino a moment before moving to Naruto to check him over. "How's he been?" Tsunade asked. Kakashi ignored the question, still glancing over the pilfered scroll. "The same, I guess. I don't really know," Ino answered when she saw that the copy nin wasn't going to reply. Tsunade's hands glowed as she ran a diagnostic jutsu over Naruto's prone form. "Did the nurses mention anything?" she asked, not really expecting a change in the boy's condition so soon. What nurses?" the genin asked, not really sure how to answer. "The ones that came in every 20 minutes, Tsunade said, looking up at the girl with a hint of annoyance on her face. Ino glanced over to Kakashi a moment, before looking back at the Godem. She cautiously answered, "Hokage-sama, No one's come in here all day except for Lee-san and Guy-sensei. What? The Sanin asked, rather incredulously. She gave Kakashi a sharp look. Is this true? No one's been in here aside from myself, Ino-san, and those two, the copy nin lazily answered. He had taken out a small brush and was writing something on the scroll. He had yet to look up at anyone in the room. Tsunade stared at him for a moment, before storming over to the foot of the bed. It moved a couple feet to the side as she forcefully ripped the chart off of it. She glared at it and flipped through several pages. Finally she tore the pages off the metal backing and shoved them into one of her robe's large pockets. I'll be dealing with this soon, the Godem growled, looking every bit the legendary Sanin infamous for her temper. Shizune gave a little shudder at the thought of what was in store for the nurses who deliberately ignored the Kyuubi vessel. Despite the cold shiver crawling up her spine, the dark-haired medic found very little sympathy for such unprofessional conduct. Social stigma had no place in a hospital, especially in an IC ward. Hokage-sama, Ino asked hesitantly. Now she knew why Sakura looked like a nervous wreck after some training sessions. Yes? Tsunade said, looking over at the slim blonde girl. A hint of familiarity flickered through her eyes. You're the Yamanaka's girl, right? Yeah, Ino replied, the flare of annoyance at being the daughter of a famous clan killing her nervousness. What is it? The Hokage asked, moving over to the monitoring machines next to the bed. Naruto? Is he going to be? The genin asked. Tsunade sighed and glanced over at the smaller blonde. I assume Kakashi gave you the details? She said, just in general. He couldn't give me the specifics, Ino replied. The copy nin in question didn't even blink when his name was mentioned. He was still scribbling something down on the scroll he'd swiped. I see. Tsunade stared at the girl, as if sizing her up. Ino shifted a little, but otherwise didn't break eye contact, which took all her willpower considering she was facing a Sanin. Alright, I guess you want the full diagnosis, huh? I'll tell you, but only on the condition that you don't let it get out to any of your friends aside from Sakura. She'll find out from reading his chart anyways, so it doesn't really matter. When Ino nodded, Tsunade gave her the full list of Naruto's injuries, being careful to exclude any direct mention of the Kyuubi. After the medic finished, the genin was silent for several moments in shock over the damage Naruto had taken. She forced her stupor away in favor of asking, but, Hokage-sama, isn't there anything you can do? I mean, you're a legendary. You even helped Lee-san and no one could do anything for him. A dark look crossed Tsunade's face, but it wasn't one of anger. The tall woman moved to sit on the edge of Naruto's bed, as she pondered what to say. Naruto's injuries are both better and worse than Lee's were. Lee's life was constantly at risk with the damage to his spine, while Naruto's life isn't in danger from his muscular destruction. On the other hand, Lee could at least walk around. Naruto will be lucky if he can ever lift a pair of chopsticks again. Beyond that, with Lee all I had to do was remove the bone fragments. With Naruto I'd have to rebuild his entire muscle network. That would mean regenerating from scratch. There isn't a known jutsu on the continent that can do that. There is very little I can do for him, the legendary medic lectured. Ino frowned a little and thought. What you can do for him? What's that mean? Somebody else can help him? In a sense, Tsunade muttered, looking towards Naruto's abdomen. Louder, she replied, Naruto has a certain ability. His body has an accelerated healing factor that normally repairs virtually all damage to him. Really? Ino said, surprise and hope coming over her face. A bloodline limit? How powerful is it? Tsunade shook her head as she said, not an actual limit. His body is just different from other people. As for how powerful it is, when I debriefed and checked him over after Sasuke's defection, he mentioned that the Uchiha brat had rammed his entire hand through his chest with a chidori. It punctured and burned through his right lung, but he was able to regenerate it entirely in a minute. When I checked the spot, he didn't have scar or any sort of internal damage to that area at all. Even his cells had no traces of genetic damage like normal fast healing would leave. Not only that, but he didn't have a scar anywhere on his body, even though he'd been on active duty for almost half a year. That not only got Ino's attention, but Kakashi's as well. When he brought back Naruto, all he had seen were chakra burns all over the boy's body. There wasn't any trace of being directly hit with a chidori, so he'd assumed that Sasuke had just beaten the crap out of him. That meant he'd vastly underestimated both his students. The Kyuubi's influence on Naruto's body was far greater than he'd originally thought, and Sasuke had fallen much farther than he'd dared to think. Kakashi had originally thought that Sasuke was merely being foolish in his blind pursuit of power and had been seduced by Orochimaru's offers. But to use an assassination technique on his closest friend and comrade changed that perspective. The Chidori can't be used to merely stun or immobilize an opponent. It can only do critical levels of damage. Hadn't that been part of his own lesson to the dark-haired boy when he'd taught him the technique? If Sasuke had used that jutsu on Naruto, it could only be a deliberate attempt to kill. He should have read the goddamn reports instead of foolishly assuming he knew what had happened. Being a genius was good in combat, but it also led to arrogance that led to very foolish mistakes. You fucked up big time, Hitaki, Kakashi angrily thought to himself. Not only did you get on the poor little Uchiha bandwagon, but you also taught him a B-rank assassination technique that he tried to kill his best friend with. And since you assumed Sasuke would never use it against a friend, you never taught Naruto a counter, and he nearly got killed because of it. Nice, genius, nice. While Kakashi was berating himself, Ino was staring at Tsunade with a hopeful expression. So he'll be up in no time, right? If he can regrow part of a lung, then his muscles should. The genin trailed off as the Hokage shook her head. It's not that easy. This is much worse than just a lung. The Chidori wound was externally inflicted damage. Naruto's muscles have atrophied as a side effect of his healing factor overcompensating for blood production. That changes things, the Sannin replied. Ino stared at her blankly. She wasn't dumb, but medical talk tended to go over her head. Fortunately, Shizune was listening in right behind her and noticed her confusion. What she means is when he was hit with the Chidori, Naruto-kun's body recognized it as an outside threat and dealt with it as such. Atrophy, on the other hand, is the body strip mining itself to keep from dying. Naruto-kun's healing factor might not repair the damage if it came from the inside, the dark-haired medic explained as she put a comforting hand on Ino's shoulder. Oh, the genin's voice sounded very small and disappointed. This is assuming his healing factor even works, Tsunade grumbled. He seems to heal faster when actively using chakra, so I would normally try outside chakra stimulation with a jutsu or acupuncture, but it wouldn't do any good with his inner coils so screwed up. Right now, he can barely keep enough energy flowing to stay alive, let alone regenerate. I see, Ino quietly said. There was a long silence that stretched out uncomfortably. Tsunade looked towards Naruto again to distract herself when something occurred to her. Where's his necklace? She asked, though it came out more like a demand. Ino watched in confusion as Shizune suddenly moved past her. Necklace? Oh, I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama. Here it is, the dark-haired medic said as she pulled out a leather string with a very pretty green stone on the end of it. I took it when Jiraiya-sama brought him in. It was dirty, so I wanted to clean it off before he wore it again. Oh, thank you, Shizune-kun, Tsunade replied, her anger noticeably calming. Both Ino and Kakashi watched curiously as the medic handed the necklace to the Hokage. Tsunade carefully leaned Naruto's head forward and put the leather string around his neck, then eased his head back again. Ino tried to picture the boy without the bandages and had to admit the necklace would look good on him. A slight gasp to her side made her look over at the copy nin. Hokage-sama, isn't that? Kakashi asked, his eye noticeably wider. It had taken him several moments before he recognized the jewelry. Yes, my grandfather's necklace, Tsunade answered, still leaning over the boy. Her hand gently stroked the tuft of hair exposed. Huh? Who's your grandfather? Ino asked in confusion. It was really annoying to be the only ignorant one here. The Shodai, the first Hokage of the Leaf. That stone is rumored to be worth enough to buy several mountains, Kakashi answered. He gave the fifth a hard look. For you to give that to a genin? I made a bet with Naruto and I lost, Tsunade answered in a stiff voice. Her glare would have made Kakashi flinched if his body wasn't moving so sluggishly. Besides, it has absolutely nothing to do with you, Hitaki-san. Mind your own business. After a tense moment of silence, Ino asked, what was the bet? It must have been something big. Tsunade turned away from the copy nin and back to Naruto. For a long moment it seemed like she wouldn't answer. Ino was just about to apologize for being so forward, when the Sannin spoke. When Jiraiya and Naruto found Shizune and me on their trip to recruit me as the fifth, Naruto was a few days into learning a powerful move called Rasengan. We got into a fight and he tried to use an imperfect version on me. Obviously it failed. I made a bet with him that he couldn't master it in a week. On the 7th day after that, we fought Orochimaru and one of his flunkies. Not only did Naruto pull off a completed version of the move, but he also did it while saving my life and defeated an elite Junin-level ninja in the process. I gave the necklace to him afterwards, Tsunade said. A painful, dark look grew in her eyes. He certainly earned it. A week, Kakashi exclaimed, his voice choked with disbelief. Are you serious? How were you sure it was a perfect Rasengan? Tsunade gave the copy ninja a wicked grin that made the Junin's insides squirm unpleasantly. It worked on Kabuto just fine, she smirked, knowing Kakashi himself had a couple rough encounters with the sound nin before. Kabuto? The Junin's eye widened even further. Naruto had beaten Kabuto. Yes, though I'm sorry to say he survived. Barely, the Hokage answered. He was able to use chakra to buffer some of the initial impact. It still threw him 40 feet into a boulder and even his medical jutsu couldn't entirely heal the damage the Rasengan did to his body. I figured nearly killing a ninja of your caliber meant the move was mastered. Looks like you made the same mistake as old Sarutobi. Kakashi's head lowered and he stared into his scroll-covered lap. Naruto had mastered the Rasengan in a week? Damn, he hadn't even thought to ask Jiraiya-sama about it. Then again, he seemed to have done a lot of not thinking since Team 7 formed. For a genius, he was sloppy. He'd assumed Sasuke was just like him, with the Sharingan and being brilliant at combat. It had taken Sasuke only a day to learn the Chidori, but that wasn't really an accurate measurement. Kakashi had made the seals, powered up the jutsu, and shattered a boulder with it while Sasuke copied his every move with the Sharingan. Naruto couldn't copy jutsu. Even if he could, the Rasengan itself couldn't be copied. It had no seals and there was a specific training process that had to be completed before it could be used. One had to work hard to learn it. Even Jiraiya-sama had needed several weeks to learn it from his own student. For Naruto to have mastered such a powerful and difficult technique in a week and to have beaten a ninja arguably as strong as the copy ninja himself spoke volumes about the boy's potential. Potential Kakashi had ignored in favor of his other student. Tsunade's words hit home, though the copy ninja gave no external reaction. He had blatantly favored Sasuke over Naruto during the exams, even if he had tried to get him a different tutor. What's worse, he had the gall to criticize Jiraiya because he had taught the boy a move that was stronger than Sasuke's. Sarutobi had made a similar line of mistakes when he'd favored Orochimaru over Jiraiya, just because the Snake Sannin had better natural talent than the Frog Sannin. Kakashi had repeated that error, even after Sasuke was infected with a seal designed to make someone even more power-hungry. The copy nin let his head droop some more. He hadn't even apologized for it either. Hell, he'd barely talked to Naruto since the Chunin exams. He should have taught both of them equally. Actually, to be fair, he should have taught the three of them equally. He had foisted Naruto off on someone else and he'd ignored Sakura entirely. No wonder the two of them had gone off and found other teachers. And Sasuke? Sasuke had taken everything he thought would be useful from the copy ninja, then left to find someone else to give him more power. Looking back on it, Kakashi wondered how he'd missed the fact that Sasuke was a selfish brat. Or, more accurately, why he'd ignored that fact. A move is it? Ino's curious voice dragged Kakashi from his thoughts. Well, you'd have to ask Jiraiya if you want to know the exact details, but I can tell you it's deadly. Very deadly, Tsunade answered. The Yondaime spent 3 years creating it and the effort shows. The Rasengan can be used in several different ways, but its main function is to rip through anyone and anything. It does little surface damage, but internally it shreds and twists like no other jutsu. Only 3 people have ever learned it and one of them is dead. Wow, Ino said. She'd been right before when she'd assessed the other genin's caliber. Naruto didn't know many moves, but the ones he did know were jaw-dropping. Maybe he could show it to her when he woke up. What rank is it? A rank, Tsunade and Kakashi responded at the same time. Ino raised an eyebrow, both at the rank and the stereo effect. So, why did Jiraiya-sama teach him the fourth's technique? The genin asked. Tsunade's expression darkened again. I don't know, but probably because Naruto looks like him. Jiraiya taught the Yondaime, so seeing someone with a strong resemblance to him might have inspired him to do it, the Hokage answered. There was another reason, but not even Jiraiya was certain about it. The records around the time of the Kyuubi's assault were sketchy and it would take a great deal of investigation to know for sure. That was time and effort neither of them had to spare. Still, if it was true, well, it's a nice necklace, Ino said, running out of stuff to say. She didn't know Tsunade on any level, so it was hard to come up with something to talk about. It is, the Godime's tone was little more than a whisper. I'm just glad it serves him like it does me, instead of. Shizune flinched at that. No one said anything for a long minute as Tsunade shifted her position further up on the bed so she could look at Naruto's face. Her expression held the look of old pain that had never healed. She slowly reached a hand out and rested it on the boy's bandaged forehead. Could you leave us alone for a while? Tsunade quietly asked. There was a hint of command in her voice. Ino blinked. What was going on? Sure, Hokage-sama, Kakashi said as he grabbed his crutches and limped out the door. Shizune gently ushered Ino out of the room and closed the door behind her. The last thing the genin saw before it shut was Tsunade leaning over to press her lips to Naruto's bandaged forehead as tears streaked down her face. What's that all about? Ino asked. Shizune sighed and motioned her to move away from the door. They found Kakashi seated on one of the wall benches a few rooms down. As the genin sat down next to him, she noticed he was looking over the scroll again. How he'd managed to get it out of the room unrolled and with both hands occupied without crumpling it was a mystery. Shizune glanced up and down the hall to make sure there were no eavesdroppers before she began speaking. That stone has a dark history to it, the medic began. Ino and Kakashi looked up, both curious about Tsunade's odd reaction. You see, it's only served Tsunade-sama. Everyone else who's ever worn it has died soon afterwards. Supposedly, even the first and the second were wearing it when they were killed. Tsunade-sama gave it to her little brother and he was brutally murdered by an enemy nin the next day. Later on she gave it to her first love and he died only a few days after on a mission. The only other person the stone hasn't harmed is Naruto-kun. Oh, Ino said. What the hell do you say to that? Even Kakashi's eye drifted to the floor. Then again, he used to be an Anbu captain, so he knew firsthand what it was like to lose someone close to him. Speaking of closeness, not to pry or anything, but what was with? Ino trailed off, not really sure how to voice her question. You mean why Tsunade-sama is so close to Naruto-kun? Shizune replied, a bit of life coming back to her face. Well, I've never seen any pictures, but she told me once that Naruto-kun looks almost exactly like her brother. Even more than that, both her brother and her boyfriend dreamed of becoming a Hokage and I'm sure you know Naruto-kun has the same goal. It gives Tsunade something to hold onto, I think. She's been much happier ever since meeting him. Oh, I see, Ino said. And Naruto? Sakura told me once he called the fifth A hag to her face. Shizune laughed a little, that's just the way the two of them are. They yell and fight constantly, but I think that's how they like it. Naruto-kun has never had any family his whole life. Tsunade-sama fills the role for him like he does for her. They were both very lonely people and having a family means a great deal to them, even if it isn't one of blood. Besides, after saving each other's lives it would be kind of hard not to grow closer. I've seen the Hokage punch Naruto through the floor before. Literally. If they're family, then they're constantly attempting fratricide on each other, Kakashi commented dryly. Shizune just shrugged, a small smile on her face. Even if the two nearly gave her a heart attack every time they fought, it was still kind of cute to watch. Well, we should probably leave her alone for a while. When she gets like this, it's just best not to disturb her. Naruto-kun's close call probably drug up a bunch of old memories on top of scaring her to death, the medic said, her face losing its cheer. The other two nodded, Kakashi going back to the scroll immediately. His interest finally caught Shizune's attention and she curiously asked, Hitaki-san? What's that you have? Ino nearly choked. It was bad enough the stinking copy ninja was vandalizing her stuff. She didn't want the Hokage's assistant poking through it too. Who knew if there was some sort of law about bloodlines or something? Kakashi might not give a shit, but Shizune looked like she took rules seriously. Oh, just something naughty, Kakashi cheerfully said, his eyes smiling and a little heart floating above his head. Ino nearly fell to the floor. Why did she even bother? Shizune's sweat dropped and said, "Hitaki-san. Don't read your smut in a hospital, for Kami's sake. I'll have to tell the Hokage if you keep it up." Kakashi laughed nervously and rolled the scroll up. "That's not necessary, Shizune-san. I'll be good," he said with another heart floating up. The medic glared at him, before shaking her head. She looked over to Ino and said, "I'm sorry to leave you with this poor excuse for a man, but I have to go and check on some other patients. I'll see you two later." "Okay, bye Shizune-san," Ino replied, waving as the medic walked off down the hall. As soon as Shizune was out of sight, the genin gave Kakashi one of her death glares. "If you were writing some sort of porno crap in my scroll." She trailed off, making a fist. The copy nin started sweating a bit. No, I was just making a couple notes," Kakashi said, holding his hands up in defense. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt for now, but if I find out you're lying." Ino held her hand under the Junin's face and loudly cracked one of her fingers. Hi, I understand," Kakashi said. "Kami-sama, that girl was frightening when she wanted to be." His thoughts were interrupted by his stomach loudly reminding him that not only had he drained all his chakra, but he also hadn't eaten all day. Ino sighed, feeling her stomach grumble in agreement. "Let's go to the cafeteria," the genin said. She stood and helped the unsteady copy nin to his feet. "You can answer a couple questions while we eat." As the genin and Junin made their way down the hall, neither noticed the flash that ducked further into one of the rooms they passed. "Alright, your setup isn't that bad. I would suggest more ninjutsu and some tool skills though. I am curious, what's with the question mark on the blood point?" Ino glanced up at Kakashi, amazed that his pork buns were already gone. She herself was only halfway through her miso soup. She'd been idly curious if the man would remove his mask to eat, but it seemed he could ingest food at the speed of sound or something. The two ninjas were sitting at one of the many restaurant-styled booths in the large, well-lit hospital cafeteria. The place seemed less like an actual cafeteria and more like a large food court from a mall. It was spacey, clean, and had assorted plants all over the place. There was even a semi-transparent skylight in the ceiling and a large fountain set into one wall. Tsunade was deadly serious when it came to medical funding, it seemed. They had picked a seat in the less crowded area in the middle of the court, where they could watch the fountain or the different food vendors easily. Ino currently had the scroll spread out in front of her on the table, with her soup and a dango sitting off to the side. Kakashi's notes had turned out to be little tidbits of advice that he'd written in the margin all throughout the scroll. They were actually pretty helpful, with advice on what info was good and what parts were faulty or just plain crap. He had even jotted down the titles of a couple books with good training techniques, the address to a good second-hand scroll bookstore that specialized in texts on the ninja arts, and the names of a few chunin and junin who might train her in their spare time. For a genin with poor experience, it was a goldmine. "Well, I was thinking about my family's jutsu. You know, the Shintenshin?" Ino said. When Kakashi nodded, indicating that he knew of the technique, the genin continued, "So I've been thinking that it's just a family technique, but what if it's part of something more? I've had strange dreams ever since I learned the jutsu and they always seem I don't know. Not prophetic or anything, but I see things in them that I later experience in real life. Well, usually anyways." Kakashi's rested his chin on his steepled hands and narrowed his eye a little in thought. "So today, with Naruto?" Ino nodded, her gray eyes darkening in memory. Last night I had a dream. I still can't remember much of it, but I do remember the ground wobbling and the smell of blood," she said. "Gamabunta-sama's jumping and Naruto's injuries," Kakashi said, filling in the blanks. Ino continued, "That's what I figured too. Anyways, I was thinking there's a chance I might have some sort of psychic bloodline limit. At least, that's what I hope. In all honesty, I'd settle for a bloodline period, whatever it might be. I was wondering if you knew how to awaken a limit, seeing as you have a Sharingan and all. If you don't, or if I don't have one, I was wondering if it's possible to create one." Kakashi allowed his eye to close as he thought out an appropriate response. Not sensing the silence to be uncomfortable, Ino grabbed her dango and took a bite out of it while looking over the notes in her scroll again. There was a comfortable buzz of conversation in the air as assorted medics, patients, and visitors walked about the cafeteria looking for an early dinner. Kakashi's eye finally opened and focused on the girl in front of him. He took in the sight of a slim, pretty blonde who looked more like someone who spent their days at the mall than someone who spent their days figuring out how to kill more efficiently. Ino was calmly munching away, nodding her head in agreement to something she was reading. She didn't seem like the type to take being a ninja seriously, but at the same time he'd seen the traces of her determination and fury up close. She was very much like a quieter, less foolish version of Naruto in that respect. If she really did want to do this, why do you want a bloodline limit so badly? For that matter, why all this? The copy ninja asked as he gestured to the scroll on the table. Is it to pass the Chunin exam? To beat Sakura? To prove yourself to a boy? Why? Ino set what was left of her dango aside and narrowed her eyes at the Junin. The long and short of it? I'm weak. I'm at the bottom of the pole compared to the rest of the ninjas my age, and while I graduated near the top, everyone else has exceeded me. I've got one special move and that barely works unless it's used with the Nara family jutsu. Teamwork is important, but so is being able to stand on your own 2 feet. I want to get better and stronger. More than that, I want my own niche and place to fit in. This, she said, pointing at the scroll, will hopefully be a start to that. A bloodline would be a powerful asset and would give me a specialty that could be useful. Even without a limit, maybe with some advanced training I'll be able to at least catch up to my friends while I'm looking for a unique style of my own. Ino trailed off and watched Kakashi for his reaction. For a long moment he didn't even blink, but a pleased glint seemed to appear in his eye after a while. Not a bad argument. Could be better. The copy nin casually dodged as Ino chucked a wadded-up napkin at him, but a good start, either way. I do have some knowledge on bloodline limits that'll help you, but more than that, I think you need to spend some time researching exactly what you want in a fighting style. Kakashi reached out and tapped the pentagon on the scroll and said, like I said earlier, this is not a bad idea. It needs fine-tuning and you shouldn't force yourself to stick to it if you aren't going anywhere, but it's got potential. You understand enough about genjutsu to know that you can't over-depend on it. You do need some taijutsu training, but with your build it would probably be better to learn more ninjutsu. I'd say the focus on Tai is fine, but mark the nin point up a little more and fill at least a quarter of the tool's point. You'll still need to know how to throw a kunai and what the odd object your opponent just pulled out is. I left it blank because I didn't want to over-depend on it like Ino started, but was cut off when Kakashi interrupted, like Kiba does. Yes, I'm surprised Kurenai-chan allowed him to do that. A tool is supposed to play a supporting role, not a necessary part of the fighting style. Anyways, you should still have some knowledge in that field. I suggest getting a few weapon and tool books to study. A few scrolls on traps would be helpful too, so you can at least identify them. For taijutsu, try to get one of your friends to tutor you in it. I'd suggest Lee-kun. He's almost as weird as his teacher, but he's powerful as hell. No one knows more taijutsu in Konoha than Maeda Guy, and that shows in his student. Lee-kun's been training under him for only 2.5 years and he went from dropout to near Junin levels in that time. Just don't let them talk you into wearing one of those god-awful spandex suits, okay? I'd rather melt my eyeballs out with lye than be seen in something like that, Ino deadpanned in a perfectly serious voice. Kakashi replied in an equally serious tone, good. Anyways, the Junin continued. As far as genjutsu goes, I'd say buy a bunch of scrolls and books on it and mark all the jutsu you want to learn. Then take them to a genjutsu specialist and have them train you in it or tell you if you're looking at the wrong skills. On top of that, regularly do exercises that build stamina and chakra control. Don't expect miracles for your chakra reserves, but definitely plan on perfecting your control. Genjutsu doesn't rely on control as heavily as medical jutsu does, but it's far more important than having a lot of raw chakra. Ino had pulled out a normal pen she'd scrounged up from somewhere and was scribbling down additional notes as Kakashi talked. Most of what he was telling her he had already written on the scroll, but it was still helpful to have it in her own words. Got it. So what about ninjutsu? She asked. At that, Kakashi frowned and scratched his chin. Ironically, the best person to tutor your ninjutsu would be Naruto, he said. Ino dropped her pen in surprise. Really? You're serious? She asked. Kakashi nodded and continued. You see, I'm setting this up so your trainers match how far you want to go in a particular field. You want to specialize in genjutsu, so you'll need a Junin to teach you, while you comrades will be able to improve your ninjutsu and taijutsu, and tools you only need to review. Now, of your comrades, the people with the best skills in pure ninjutsu would either be Naruto or Sasuke, if he hadn't left. Everyone else is specialized in some other area or has their ninjutsu tied up to their bloodline or family jutsu. Naruto doesn't know many ninjutsu, but he learns them fast and is a total stamina freak. If you wanted someone to help you learn a ninjutsu skill, those are the best qualities in a tutor. Besides, who knows what kind of skills Jiraiya-sama has taught him since they left? Ino nodded slowly. I get it, but he's totally laid up right now. Who'll teach me in the meantime? Kakashi's eye turned into an upside down, you. Ino shook her head in disbelief. You? Well, I can't spare too much time since the Hokage always has me on missions, but I have more free time now that I don't have a team anymore. Most weekends I'm here in Konoha, so we can go over some jutsu and training exercises if you want. Although, you might want to get awesome as okay first, the copy ninja said, leaning back in his seat. Peeved, Ino rolled her eyes at that one. Asuma-sensei's a good fighter, but he barely trains us at all. He spends most of his time playing old man games with Shikamaru and tells us to train on our own. I've been yelling at him for years to take us more seriously. He'll agree just to get away from my nagging. Kakashi nodded. Good. We can meet up this Saturday at the Memorial Training Ground and I can look over your progress so far. Ino put a finger to her chin in thought and asked, why are you willing to train me? We've met like 3 times before. Not that I don't appreciate the gesture, but I'm curious. Kakashi stared down at the genin's unfinished soup for several long moments before saying, I fucked up. Ino blinked. That wasn't what she was expecting. Excuse me? The copy nin met her gray eyes with his obsidian gaze. With my team, I screwed up. The girl thought about it for a long moment before realizing, Sasuke. To her surprise, Kakashi shook his head. Not just him. I messed up just as bad with Naruto. And Sakura to a lesser degree. Ino asked, how so? I mean Sasuke turned traitor, but none of us really saw it coming. And both Naruto and Sakura turned out great. Under other sensei, Kakashi replied. He crossed his arms and looked down at the table. While I gave general training to them all, I focused much more on Sasuke. I made the mistake of just looking at who they were on the outside. Externally, Sasuke was a genius, Sakura was weak, and Naruto was a fool. But I didn't follow my own teachings. My first lesson to them was, look underneath the underneath. If I had bothered to look, I would have seen that Sasuke was power-obsessed and riding a vengeance kick. Sakura had excellent chakra control and medical potential, and Naruto. As Kakashi's eye closed, Ino filled in the blank. Naruto is potential incarnate. The copy ninja gave a painful nod and continued. At the time all I could see was a genius and 2 extras, despite Naruto and Sakura's great progress. I actually bragged once that Sasuke was just like me. I even told off that sand kid for assuming he knew what Sasuke was really like even as I was making the same mistake. It figures I'd be proven wrong by a lunatic. But I didn't realize it then, so I kept training him and teaching him as much advanced jutsu as I knew. I even taught him the only technique I ever created. Ino looked a little confused as she asked, that's it? I mean that bad considering he turned traitor but… Kakashi shook his head and said, no, I don't mean I just trained him. I favored him over Naruto. Blatantly. The blonde's eyes narrowed as she said, define blatant. The Junin sighed and rubbed his eye. As in he asked me immediately after the Chunin preliminaries for help in the upcoming tournament and I flat out told him, no, that I was going to train Sasuke instead. Ino raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms as she said, I have to say Hitaki, when you fuck up, you do it big. Kakashi winced a little at the sharp tone. It sucked being in a guilt trip, but it sucked even worse when someone else agreed with your reasoning. Yeah, I tried to get him another tutor, but… he wanted his own sensei to teach him. He saw it as being tossed aside for the umpteenth time for the great Uchiha Sasuke, this time by his own teacher who he'd worked hard to impress. Then he went off on his own and by luck stumbled across a better, stronger teacher. And now it burns you that not only did you basically tell him that he wasn't worth the time to train because Sasuke was better than him and would beat him anyways, he bounced back and now he's someone else's star pupil and you can't take any credit for it. Am I right? Ino calmly stated in her calm, yet razor-sharp voice. Disturbingly correct. Are you sure you're not psychic yet? Kakashi jested, trying to cover his guilt with a bit of humor. The guilt in his eye gave him away though. And now you want to make that up a little bit by properly teaching someone else? The sharp blonde continued. Kakashi could only nod. HMPH. And everyone said he was the idiot of Team 7. Did you even apologize to him about it or congratulate him on beating Neji and that sand freak and this Kabuoko guy or whatever his name is? Ino asked. The copy nin grimaced under his mask and shook his head. No, to all the above. I think, more than tutoring me, you owe him an apology when he wakes up, Ino calmly said, the venom in her voice disappearing. Kakashi blinked and stared at her, surprise evident on his face. She was suddenly letting him off the hook? The girl shrugged at his look and took a sip of her lukewarm soup. What? It was him you screwed over, not me. It's not like you aren't sorry about it, but I think he'd appreciate it more if you actually told him rather than beat yourself up for it. This whole time he's probably been thinking you've missed your protégé more than you missed him. And they said Sakura was the smartest of your class, Kakashi said, chuckling and shaking his head. Ino snorted and replied, flattery only gets you so far, Hitaki. I'd rather you tell me what you know about bloodline limits, since that's the only thing we haven't covered. We can go over the rest on Saturday. Kakashi looked at her a little surprised and said, you still want to meet up for training? Well, duh, the genin replied, rolling her eyes. You may play favorites, but at least you actually train your students. Asuma-sensei can't even claim that much. Now tell me about the limits. The copy nin nodded, eager to get at the subject of his failure, and began, alright. First off, while you may have a hidden limit that's been forgotten by your family or was added by an external marriage, the odds of it are very low. In this village, only 1 person in 30 has a bloodline and we have the largest collection of limits on the continent. Recessive bloodlines are even rarer than that. Next, assuming you do have a limit, it's harder than hell to awaken it. I know the Sharingan awakens during times of battle and great stress, but that might not be the case for yours. There's a range of difficulty when it comes to awakening different limits. For instance, every Hyuga who can use chakra can also use the Byakugan. That's just the way their bloodline is. In your case, I think some sort of mental disturbance, like an outside force trying to enter your mind, would be your best chance to awaken the limit. This is, of course, assuming you have one and assuming it's a psychic ability. And the Byakugan brings up another point. Even if you do awaken a limit, it might not be very powerful, especially if your family hasn't been selectively breeding to strengthen the bloodline. Every Hyuga can use the Byakugan, but not every Hyuga can see chakra opening points, you see. Only a few have inherited the bloodline that's strong. So you've got quite the crapshoot to work through. Your bloodline might be weak, you might not be able to awaken it, and you may not have one at all. Ino sighed. She had known it would be a gamble, but she hadn't known just how bad the odds were. Still, there was one other route. What about making a bloodline? She asked, having no idea if it was safe or even possible, but figuring it wouldn't hurt to find out. Kakashi shook his head as he said, not a good idea for 2 major reasons. 1. Creating a limit is a very long process. It takes mastery of seals, rituals, and extensive knowledge on the workings of the human body. Not to mention you need to be about as powerful as a Sannin to pull off the creation process. The seals have to be balanced properly and they need to be thoroughly tested to avoid nasty side effects. The rituals themselves are deadly and even masters get themselves and everyone involved killed half the time because of a tiny error. You also pay a high price for making the limit. The bloodline wouldn't go to you, but to your children. In return for your descendants bearing the limit, your ability to use chakra is virtually destroyed. To get a limit you either have to be born with it or have it sealed into you the day you are born. That's the first reason. And the second? Ino asked in a groaning tone, her hopes at creating a bloodline already destroyed. The second reason is no one knows how to make them anymore, Kakashi said with a cheerful eye smile. The genin rolled her eyes at the man's mood swings. The Junin ignored the not-so-subtle jibe and kept talking. The only place that information is kept would be in an old clan's scroll vault or in the scroll of forbidden seals that only the Hokage has access to. Either way, the knowledge is pretty much gone in the leaf. There may be other hidden villages that still actively practice bloodline creation, but not here. We've never really practiced limit creation, actually. When our village was founded, Shodai-sama had an open-door policy to any and all bearers of advanced bloodlines. We got hundreds of refugees from bloodline-bearing clans from all over the continent with that move, and we've never been so short on them that we needed to create new bloodlines. Shit, Ino hissed. Well, that sucked. One method had terrible odds and the other way would just destroy her abilities, which was exactly what she didn't want. Neat history on the advanced bloodlines though. Looks like I'll take my chances on unlocking a bloodline. Even without a limit to back it up, what do you think of the training plan I've got? It's still good, Kakashi replied. A bloodline would only enhance an already sturdy setup. I say you stick to this and try it out for a decent period of time, say a year or so. While you're doing that, keep an eye out for anything that sets off those dreams of yours. They might be the key to unlocking a limit. Keep the stuff I've written down in mind and you should be fine. Oh, one thing I'd say you need to be careful about is forcing yourself to match that graph too heavily. Huh? Ino said, confusion obvious on her pretty features. Isn't that the point? The copy nin shook his head and replied, use that as a guideline, yes, but don't force yourself to fit it if you're unable to. You may not fit the mold at all. Who knows? You might find out that your genjutsu talent sucks and you're actually quite skilled at taijutsu. If you try to force yourself to fit into something you aren't made for, then you'll only wind up hurting and weakening yourself in the long run. My point is, it's good to have a goal as long as you don't let it limit you. Ino thought about it for a moment before nodding her head. Sounds good, Hitaki. I'll keep it in mind. Kakashi smiled at her, but there was a look of faint disappointment in his eyes. The girl scowled at that. What's wrong now, you bum? Did I forget to read underneath the underneath? The genin asked sarcastically, but with little venom in her voice. The copy ninja shook his head and answered, no, you got exactly what I was saying. I only wish I'd been able to teach my students that lesson. Well, Naruto seems to have gotten it pretty solidly. And I hate to burst your little I'm a genius everything relies on me bubble. But Sasuke turning out to be a traitorous asshole instead of a loyal asshole isn't your fault, so whatever he didn't learn from you is on his head. Don't know about Sakura, but who knows what she's thinking. Ino said with a raised eyebrow as she forced herself to finish the rest of her cool soup before eating what was left of her dango. The Junin in front of her let out a tired sigh and said, you're right, Ino-san, but I still feel that I could have taught Sasuke better. It seems that all he chose to learn from me were tricks to kill people with. His goal is to become an Avenger, and he's sacrificed everything to realize that. Ironically, he's only destroyed his growth in the process and he'll never be able to fulfill his ambition. As for Naruto, Kakashi looked down at the table his arms rested on. He painfully said, I could never teach that lesson to Naruto because he's known it all along. He could teach me a thing or two about allowing a dream or a goal to hold you down. Part of being the Hokage is being the best at damn near everything, including being a good human being. I have little doubt that he'll succeed in his dream. Well, I had little doubt. With his injuries, Ino looked up as she swallowed the last bite of her dango. Speaking of Naruto, I wonder if the Hokage is feeling better? I was going to head back up for a while before I went home. You coming? She asked casually, seeming to dismiss the man's guilty air. No, I'll hang around here for a bit. I'll be spending the night on the couch in his room anyways. I figured I might as well pull guard duty while I'm stuck here, Kakashi answered. Alright, I'll head on up then, Ino said, getting to her feet and grabbing her tray. We still on for training Saturday? The copy ninja nodded, his eyes still downcast. He jumped in surprise when the blonde punched his arm. Knock off the gloomy act, will you? Rather than wallow in self-pity, you should be thinking up a decent apology. I hear Iruka-sensei takes Naruto out to a ramen bar all the time, so bribe him with food or something, Ino said. As she walked off, she gave a flippant, later, Hitaki over her shoulder. Kakashi sighed, though it was less guilt-ridden than before. The bitchy blonde had a point, damn it. As he sat there watching the fountain across the room, the copy nin idly wondered if a Junin's pay would be enough to satisfy Naruto's ramen lust. Then he winced, remembering that Iruka's wallet was always empty whenever the boy was in town. And I was so looking forward to next Icha volume. Ino opened the door quietly, just in case the Hokage was still in the room. Peeking her head in, she was surprised to see a dark figure turned away from her. The sun had set while she was getting dinner and no one had bothered to turn the lights on in the room yet. Because of the shadow, she couldn't make out who it was, but the person was definitely smaller than Tsunade. Whoever it was, they were standing next to the bed muttering something over and over. Remembering what Kakashi had said about people being after Naruto, Ino eased her way into the room and shut door behind her. The well-oiled hinges and latch didn't make a sound, and the person appeared to be too distracted to have noticed the brief glare of light from the hall. The genin inched her way forward as her hand went to the slim kunai she kept hidden in the bandages on her right thigh. You never could be too careful in a ninja village, after all. As Ino got closer, the figure's muttering became clearer and clearer. It was still hard to make out though, and for all she knew it was some sort of bizarre jutsu. She was leaning up to grab the slim figure in a chokehold from behind when she finally caught part of what they were saying. "Stupid dobi, stupid dumb ass, can't believe you, what'll you do now, dumb moron?" Ino blinked. Her eyes were adjusting enough that she could finally make out the white circle on the back of the figure's outfit. "Sakura?" There was a sharp gasp as the person whirled around. "Ino?" The genin in question frowned. Something was funny about the way Sakura was speaking. The chunin's voice was lower and scratchier than normal. Her hand tightened on the kunai, still not sure if it was really her friend standing there. It could be an assassin using a hench to sneak in here. If that was the case, then what the hell did they do to the real Sakura? Even if the two kunoichi fought like alley cats half the time, if someone hurt her pale friend. "Yeah, it's me. Why the hell are you standing in the dark? And why is your voice oof?" The kunai skittered across the floor as a forceful impact knocked Ino onto her ass. In the twilight dark of the room, it was hard to make out her attacker. Ino tried to get to her feet, only to realize an odd weight was pinning her to the floor. Panic swept through her, the cold adrenaline heightening her senses even as her nerves screamed at her to run. "Ninjutsu? Genjutsu? What the hell did they do to me?" The genin frantically thought. A hitching sound, halfway between a sob and a sniffle, broke through Ino's haze of fear. As she took better stock of her surroundings, she realized the weight on her was warm, soft, and smelled of cherry blossoms. Carefully, she moved her arms and wrapped them around what turned out to be a near hysterical Sakura who was lying most of the way on top of her and sobbing into her chest. "Damn it, you dids. I nearly cut your throat open and you almost gave me a heart attack. If you weren't so upset I'd whack you on the head." Ino allowed herself to relax and forced her heart rate down. Slowly, she managed to tug the crying medic up and over to the more comfortable couch, as her ass wasn't appreciating resting on the cold floor. She grimly noted that she'd have quite the colorful bruise there tomorrow from all the trauma her posterior had received that day. Stupid giant toads and stupid crying kunoichi who stand around in the dark. Sakura hadn't released her hold once and only burrowed deeper into her friend's chest when Ino got them on the couch. It took the genin almost 15 minutes, but she was able to calm Sakura down enough for her to tell her what happened. Sakura had avoided visiting Naruto's room until the end of her shift just to spite Ino. When she'd finally walked up to the room, she'd paused with her hand on the door handle when she heard the Hokage speaking from inside. She'd used her excellent chakra control to hide her aura and listen in undetected. Fortunately, the ninjas inside the room were too occupied to notice the brief flicker from outside the room. She'd listened with growing horror as Tsunade listed Naruto's injuries and described his crippled healing factor. She'd been quite impressed when they talked about Naruto's mastery of an A-ranked jutsu, but that didn't surprise her much as he was always off somewhere learning something new. When the Godem asked the other ninjas to leave, she'd moved quickly down the hall and into a nearby room to avoid being caught in the act of eavesdropping. As luck or fate would have it, she'd picked a room that was nearby the bench Kakashi picked to sit on. She'd listened in on their conversation with Shizune as the older medic described Naruto and Tsunade's relationship. It hadn't really occurred to her until then, but she'd noticed before that Tsunade kept a framed picture of herself, Jiraiya, Shizune, and Naruto on her desk, presumably from the trip to bring the wayward slug Sannin back to the leaf. Sakura had spent the next hour waiting for the Hokage to leave Naruto's room and berating herself on her earlier actions. When Tsunade finally left the room to terrorize the entire nursing staff of the floor about their conduct, Sakura had snuck in and checked Naruto out for herself. She'd managed to ignore the sight of him covered in bandages, but she'd only gotten halfway through a diagnostic jutsu before the results caused her to break down. She had no idea how long she'd been standing there until Ino came in. Sakura finished her story and trailed off, relieved that her friend was there to listen to her and wasn't as angry as she's been earlier. She'd loosened her hold a bit, but she refused to let go completely. Ino sighed and ran her hands through Sakura's hair, internally grumbling about pink-haired teases who innocently flaunted how good their hair smelled to girls that used to have crushes on them. She wasn't really upset though. In all honesty, just about all her anger towards Sakura from earlier that day had disappeared when she saw how upset the medic was over her former comrade. Silly, if you'd listened to me before, you wouldn't be so upset now. Now look at how much you've gotten yourself worked up, the blonde gently said. Sakura leaned back to stare up at her for a full 5 seconds before her face crumpled and she started crying again, while burying her face in her rival's shoulder. Ino smacked her own forehead with her free hand and sighed, before trying to calm Sakura down again. Smooth, Yamanaka, real smooth. It was going to be a long night. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.